A great quote I learned from my guest today is something the poet Wendell Berry once said. What I stand for is what I stand on. End quote. The question that rose for me from that quote is, what do I stand on? Most of my life is lived inside my head, and when I think of where I stand, I am mostly not thinking of the actual place where I stand, but a larger abstraction. But think about where you stand right now. Don't give me the name of a city or a neighborhood or your housing society. Close your eyes and imagine that place 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, and maybe 100 years from now. What do you really stand on? And what do you really stand for?
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen, our weekly podcast on economics, politics, and behavioral science. Please welcome your host, Amit Varma.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen. My guest today is Arati Kumar-Rao, an author, a photographer, a writer, someone who takes life slow and always wants to go one layer deeper. I first heard of Arati through our mutual buddy Prem Panikkar, with whom Arati was part of something called the Peoply Project. I was struck by the kind of long-form hybrid storytelling she was doing with a mix of words and photography. I didn't know those phrases then, but she was doing what could be called slow travel, immersing herself in places and habitats, understanding people better, understanding what they stood on. She went walking with the legendary Paul Salopek. She spent vast amounts of time going to remote places and remote times. And she recently published a superb book called Margin Lands, Indian Landscapes on the Brink. This conversation was a long time coming, and I enjoyed every moment. Before we begin, though, let's take a quick commercial break. Do you want to read more? I've put in a lot of work in recent years in building a reading habit. This means that I read more books, but I also read more long-form articles and essays. There's a world of knowledge available through the internet, but the problem we all face is, how do we navigate this knowledge? How do we know what to read? How do we put the right incentives in place? Well, I discovered one way. A couple of friends of mine run this awesome company called CTQ Compounds at ctqcompounds.com, which aims to help people up-level themselves by reading more. A few months ago, I signed up for one of their programs called The Daily Reader. Every day for 6 months, they sent me a long-form article to read. The subjects covered went from machine learning to mythology to mental models and marmalade. This helped me build a habit of reading. At the end of every day, I understood the world a little better than I did before. So if you want to build your reading habit, head on over to CTQ Compounds and check out their Daily Reader. New batches start every month. They also have a great program called Future Stack, which helps you stay up to date with ideas, skills, and mental models that will help you stay relevant in the future. Future Stack batches start every Saturday. What's more, you get a discount of a whopping 2,500 rupees, 2,500 if you use the discount code UNSEEN. So head on over to CTQ Compounds at ctqcompounds.com and use the code UNSEEN. Up-level yourself. Arti, welcome to The Seen and the Unseen.
Thank you, Amit. Thanks for having me.
It's my great pleasure. It's been a while. And at this point, I want to, begin by informing my listeners that a minute ago, Arati was saying that I don't think I can talk for more than 1 hour. I have nothing interesting to say, blah, blah, etc., etc. And I was absolutely shocked, especially coming from you, because you are, in a sense, a connoisseur of the slow life yourself, in terms of sinking into a place to understand it, in terms of not worrying about the form of a medium, but going as deep as you want, and so on and so forth. So you're the one person I would really expect to come here and say that, Amit, we need at least 10 hours, 12 hours. Let's do this over months. But you're not saying
I
that.
wish. No. Well, unfortunately, when it comes to me speaking, I don't think it's going to get that long.
What kind of, I don't want to use the word content because some people object to it, but what kind of content do you consume in terms of books and movies? Where do your tastes run?
Quite wide. I love first-person accounts, non-fiction, especially by people who have either faced or are facing some kind of displacement. So I read a lot of refugee kind of account books. So a lot of that. Actually, anything. I read a lot of fiction too. I love historical fiction. And then a lot of non-fiction, which is, of course, nature writing largely, but also other kinds of non-fiction like, Killers of the Flower Moon and those kinds of, like the crime-ish non-fiction. Lots of things, different things. different things. And I do consume a lot of podcasts.
Wow, I didn't expect that. Yeah. I had a guest here yesterday, the economist Soumya Dhanraj, who said something that completely stunned me. She said that once she forgot her mobile phone at her tailor's and she didn't realize she had forgotten it. And she went back a day later, full 24 hours had elapsed. And the tailor said that, "Madam, you left your phone." And that was when she realized that she had left her phone. And I was so jealous of this because I was like, Soumya, if I am without my phone for 15 minutes, except in the rare occasions of recordings like this, but if I am without it for 15 minutes, trust me, I will know. And that is something I lament because I feel that, when I was growing up in the 70s, 80s, etc., the texture of our lives was so much more slower and we could sink into experiences and things. And I feel like I have lost some of that ability. I can try to regain it with intentional acts, but otherwise that natural sinking into something seems incredibly hard, right? So I want to ask you about the texture of your life because a lot of the reporting that you've done is deliberately cutting yourself off from these sort of weapons of modernity and just immersing into a particular kind of life, a particular kind of place, just spending time with people. So when you come back to the city, is that slowness of rhythm, is that way of looking something that has always been part of you, something that you managed to retain, or is it a struggle for you as well?
It's interesting, actually. I hadn't thought about it this way until you asked this question, but it takes very little time for me to be able to let go of this thing that's sitting right in front of me, the square, a rectangle, the phone. And many of the places that I find myself in for reporting do not have network. So, and it takes maybe an hour and then I've forgotten about it and it's not there. And then you're, kind of listening to things and being there very, present in the moment. And then when it's time to get back and you're on your way back, and if it's not in flight mode, it starts pinging, there's almost this reluctance in me to pick it up. I'm like, oh God, no, I don't want to see this again, that kind of stuff. And I resist it for a while, but I know that people back home will be waiting to hear from me because I've told them I'll be back in network zone by so-and-so time and so on. So then I do, pick it up. And then equally fast, I get sucked in. Right back in. So it's this very strange adaptability, I think, of the human mind. If you don't have it, you don't have it. And it's fine. You can absolutely live without it. But if you do have it, and how enticing that whole thing is, the human mind is happy to give in as well. And so...
And in these phases, like then you, in a sense, you're saying that there is a phase where you can be without a phone and you're fine, but there is a phase where you're with the phone and you're on it all the time because a phone is what it is. Is there a difference in the way that you read or the way that you write or the way that you think about it? Like, do you have to make an intentional effort when you're in the city to take an hour away, take 2 hours away, where you actually keep the phone away, or are you able to multitask and switch context?
No. I'm terrible at that. And definitely, I think when I am writing, for example, and Prem always laughs because I always tell him, I'm like, why don't I write more? Because when I'm writing, I'm so loving it. I don't miss anything in the world. And then I don't do it enough. So I think when I'm doing anything, whether it's art or whether it's writing or whether it's photography, I don't miss the phone at all. It's in those interludes that the phone becomes very, very kind of enticing to me. It's not when there's something going on, I'm happy to do that deep work without even looking for the phone. Except, like I was telling you just before we started recording, I do live in a gated community and we have this awful thing called My Gate where we have to constantly approve things. And so you need to keep it closed, which is worse, actually. But so, if it's at arm's length, the tendency to even subconsciously pick it up is so high that even if you don't want to, you find your hand having a mind of its own and reaching out for it and picking it up, which is terrible, actually. But when I'm shooting, my hands are occupied and I'm completely in the zone. Actually, when I'm writing too, many times I write in a notebook first. I don't write straight on the computer. So I write on a notebook, and again, hands are occupied and there's no way, no need to reach out for anything else except coffee or something maybe. So I think, it's the interludes when I'm between tasks and so on that I'm just a slave to the phone. Really quite a slave.
Yeah, I have my gate too, and my building, in fact, has this further thing where they've integrated the fast tag that our cars have with the building entry system. So what was happening was, and they've changed it now. Somebody must have complained, but when I would enter the building, this big billboard would light up and say, "Welcome, Amit Varma."
Oh no!
And it's visible from the street and all that. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? And I recorded once with Rahul Mathur, who's one of the architects of the whole Aadhaar system, and he had come to my home studio to record, and I told him about that, and he was like, this is illegal.
Yes,
that none
sounds
of
bad.
Yeah, like Aadhaar privacy is like so hard coded and hard baked in the way he described it, that something like this is like absolutely illegal and should not be allowed. And perhaps the building was listening into our eventual conversation because they removed that thing, so my name no longer flashes, but my car movements are tracked.
Oh my God, it's crazy. Yes. So that whole thing, you have to be constantly present. You have to be on your phone. So even if you don't want to be, but if you live in a place like that, there's something that's holding you, that, there's that leash that they have you on.
And life was actually quite different back in the day. So tell me about your childhood. You grew up in Bombay, right? So tell me about your childhood. What was it like?
I grew up in Bombay, yet a not Bombay kind of place. So my father worked at Tata Power, which has its own colony. And it's a series of colonies. There's RCF, there's Tata Colony, there's BPCL, HPCL, a bunch of those colonies. And almost all of them are pretty wooded. So we grew up in a wonderfully up and down, hilly, wooded little colony. Not very large, but just enough to be able to get lost if you want to. And, so cycling up crazy slopes. In fact, my friends from childhood, we just got on a WhatsApp group together and we were discussing what it was like. And every one of us has a tale of coming down a slope on a cycle and crashing into something and having scars to show for it, But it was just so delightful talking about it, even just on WhatsApp. It was just one of those things that just brought back a lot of memories. And then, of course, one thing led to another. And what playlists we used to listen to, it was not called a playlist then, it was those little cassettes, whatever. But the music we used to listen to, and then the books we would read, and what we would eat when we read the books, the gooseberries, the amla that we would pluck. And so I think we all came to the conclusion that, touch wood, our childhood was charmed. Because we were in a bustling metropolis like Bombay, and yet we were cocooned in this absolutely gorgeous place, which I think my sister and I counted something like about, I think it was 59 species of birds on a casual Sunday morning walk. And I've seen an Indian pitta there. I've seen, vultures. I've seen all manner of birds. And it was just a beautiful place to grow up in. Very quiet. You would not hear any sounds except a loudspeaker from, the other surrounding, maybe, the shanties and so on. So early morning Suprabhatam kind of loudspeakers. And then, of course, the occasional Hindi music blaring and so on. But it was a charmed childhood. My father believed that cars are not ecologically friendly, and so he never owned a car. He's pretty Gandhian in his thoughts. And so we would walk from this colony, which was about 1 kilometer from the main road. We'd walk to the main road, catch buses and go everywhere, trains, buses. And thank God for Bombay's public transport, I used public transport all along and was just fine. Went to college in Xavier's. So from Chembur, where I grew up, to Xavier's was a long way off, and either a 6 limited bus or a train, and to college and back every day, and never complained really. It was just really beautiful, all of that. So I think in hindsight, it just sounds charmed. We had tennis courts, we had an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So, all those things that come with the colony. So very privileged childhood, good friends, a lot of music and dance in the family, a lot of science talk, a lot of English, all of that. So,
and apart from the obvious ways in which you call it privileged, I would say that it feels like there were two distinct things which, when I think about it, make me think you're very lucky. And one of them is that even though you're in Bombay with all its advantages and all that, you've actually got nature around you. And you mentioned you had the good fortune of having a father who would take you bird watching at 4:30 in the morning and all of that. So you have that awareness of nature around you, that you're able to identify 40 bird species as mind-blowing. I stop at pigeon and crow, and which probably are all there are in my neighborhood.
No,
But
no.
I'm kidding.
You're in
And
Bombay.
yeah, so at one level, what happens is that city slickers like me, take the metaphor of the show's name forward, the nature becomes unseen to us. It might be around us, but we never actually see it. And at another level, there is something else that is unseen to us, especially when we have our private transport or we're going around in cars. The car becomes a bubble through which we travel. Everything outside the car not only becomes unseen to us, but there is no need for us to engage with it in any way. Whereas if you're in public transport all the time, you're on a bus, you're on a train, you're walking from one place to another, the engagement is kind of much deeper. You are part of that world. You can hear the noises, you can smell the smells, and all of that. And I'm just, and there is, of course, a danger in reading too much into all of this, but I'm just thinking that your acute sense of vision, the way that you see, is it something that was natural to you? Do you think that it is something that was helped along by the circumstance in which these, you're not cocooned away from these things? Or is it something that you also have to work on and develop as time goes by?
I think I would put that down to the way my family operates. We are constantly looking out for things, in nature. Sounds, not just sight. So my mom would suddenly say, "Oh, barbet," and then we'd all run out to go spot the barbet because it's there somewhere. And it happens even now, even today. Even this morning, there was a conversation where some sound of a bird. What is that? Was that a tailor bird? That kind of thing. So we are very tuned in to nature, both through vision and sound and texture and all of that. My grandfather's, on one side, he was a zoology professor. The other side was a botany professor. So I think nature has just kind of been in the family and constantly talked to, there's just those kinds of topics happening all the time. And my sister is an avid birder even today. And I think it was the upbringing and the nature in which we operated. So because otherwise I could extend it to anybody who had grown up in Bombay in a colony like that should be as aware, and it's not necessarily the case, right? So, but I think in our family, that's what it was. And so, in fact, when I was walking with Paul as well, he was amused almost at how I would keep talking to birds and, noticing birds in bushes and, things like that and naming them and so on. So I think it's just that Papa and Mummy are both very much tuned into what's around us. I think both of them are very tuned in even today to what's around us and how things connect up and making connections and so on. And that kind of trickled down to us. My daughter's like that too. And so is my sister's. Both her children are like that, very, very tuned into stuff. So, yeah, I think it's more that.
I'm also curious to know more about your father, because one of the things that sort of struck me when I was reading the little that you've written about him is that his engagement with nature, for example, was not just an aesthetic one, but also an ethical one. Mm-hmm. In the sense, you're not just appreciating nature, mm-hmm. but you're also saying, I'm not going to use a car. Mm-hmm. And you're also, that whole ethic is set in. And it seems to me that when one becomes any of the other things that you have been, whether you're a photographer or you're, doing the kind of writing that you've done, that at one level you can be drawn to it for the aesthetic considerations, which are considerable. If you can see that natural beauty, if you know how to present it, the frames to put it in, that's one thing. But in your writing, there has also been this much deeper sort of quest for a narrative that goes beyond what is in front of you, but it goes back in time and it goes out in space and all of that. So I'm guessing that began with your dad. Tell me a little bit about your dad. Tell me a little bit about the environment at home and both your parents, in fact.
Yeah, actually, very much so. I think both my parents, Papa especially, because I think I was too young before that, but I think around the 1980s when I was still in school, he began to read stuff out to us and kinds of books he read. And he was a minority of one at that time. And it almost seemed at that time like Papa's not like the other people around. We were in an electric colony, right? So everybody was an engineer, and they were all very technocratic kind of people. And Papa was so different in his thinking. So it was something that we noticed early on. And the kinds of things that he started reading to us, Masanobu Fukuoka, I mentioned this in the book as well, Wendell Berry, all those things seemed very different and seemed very to me seemed very gentle, very non-violent in a very large sense, in the sense that there's truly something, the ethic was something that was wedded to the land, wedded to how things are meant to be in nature, the natural connections, the natural civilization almost, And so that was something that we would constantly be talking about. He would actually call out many things that at that time that were considered the norm, and he would say things like, this is modern civilization. This is not, I think he called it normal civilization or something like that.
Beautiful.
But he said that this is not normal civilization, it's modern civilization, and this is not going down the right way, and so on. And so we were very conscious of that. And I think much later, I began to see the wisdom in his ways. And while I would listen to him and I would love the poetry, and I remember I used to do calligraphy, so I would write out Wendell Berry's poems in calligraphy and so on. I would read it. I think it began to sink in and make much more sense to me only much later when I paused. Otherwise, I was just running. And so when I paused, it started making sense to me. And I think at the point where I said, okay, I need to pay attention to some of these things that I have been taught. Mama was very insistent on good communication skills. So for her, good speaking, a way to, modulate your tone, your voice, handwriting, the way you write, the words you use, vocabulary, all of that was very important. She was also a teacher. So, we're quite strict, very strict growing up. And so, we kind of knew that it was this way or we're going to get into trouble. So there was, and thank God for that, frankly, in hindsight. So I think the combination of those two, that ethic that Papa brought to the family as well as the rigor that Mama brought to the family, did great for both my sister and I. And I think, it's just been in me throughout. I can't be any other way. It feels alien to me if I sit in a car too long. I hate it. And same with the plane flying over. My nose is stuck to the window pane, and I'm like, what is happening there? And it's interesting. I think I mentioned this in the book as well, that when you're down there and then when you fly over it, you realize the amount of stuff you're missing out on. And not in a FOMO kind of missing out, just the details, the understanding of the land that is just lost to you if you travel too fast and too far and too high and, whatever. So I think that it's very deep inside me, that kind of slow, as little footprint as possible, like Papa would do. Papa would say he would just have a cycle and he'd go and he'd catch the public bus and go wherever. And so as little a footprint as possible, which of course then opens your senses up to everything that's going on. You're feeling your surrounds with all your senses. And that again, I think it's so deep in me that that's just the way I don't think too much about it now. Yeah.
You mentioned reading Wendell Berry, and in your book, you've got this beautiful quote by Wendell Berry, "What I stand for is what I stand on."
Yes.
And it felt to me that was almost like an articulation of where you are coming from, because your caring and your passion for the environment and for the world around us, natural civilization, as it were, is just so, so powerful and so strong. And yet, a lot of things that are deep within us can also lie submerged or in the background for a long time. Like if one is just to look at your biography after this, you do a master's in physics, you do an MBA, you're living the corporate life. In your words, you're running. And, so when you're a kid, when you're growing up in this house where, you've got an unusual dad like this, and again, obviously, you're very lucky to have someone who's so out of this thing, you're growing up in that particular place, you can identify 890 birds or whatever the number is. And how do you think of what you are going to do in life? Because I think what happens what happens with many of us is that we treat something as a dichotomy which should not be a dichotomy, and that is the difference between what we do and what we are. And we assume that, okay, I might be this poetry loving, nature loving, music loving, whatever, but I will do this, MBA, banking, vice president, etc., etc. And to me, a cause of a lot of the silent suffering in the world is that dichotomy, that we don't realize that it is there. So do you think that you kind of, like, how was it for you? How did you see yourself? Is it just sort of inertia and just following the path of least resistance that took you across all of these things? Or, is that an unfair view? And were you also passionate about physics and management and all of those things that you went on to do?
I was passionate about physics. In hindsight, I was terrible at it. I don't know why I was passionate about it. I think it was because I really looked up to this uncle of mine who's an astrophysicist and very much wanted to emulate him. And so I went all the way through with physics and finished my master's. And then within 3 months, when I was in the lab, I was like, God, I can't do this. It's not me. And so I gave it up. But I think, you're so right about this dichotomy. And I see it all around me. I saw it in myself too, which is what happened during the pause, where that dichotomy just kind of collapsed, and it just showed me the way. Really, it was not autopilot or anything. It was just that I got married. I was in the US, and somehow I didn't find my way through to telling stories in the US and getting into corporate life. I got into corporate life as a startup within Intel. And that was really fun. 1 year of real fun. But then the dot-com bust happened and then Intel shut down that group. And then I was absorbed into the main company. And I can't say I was very good at what I did there because it was not me. But yes, there are these golden shackles, right? You're getting a monthly paycheck. Everything is really... You need that in the US, two incomes to survive and so on, in suburbia and all of that. And so there was that, but constantly gnawing at me was this feeling that this is not what I want to do. And it takes, I think, some kind of pause, some kind of disruption to then bring that to the fore. And it came pretty strongly to me. I've always, right from when I was young, wanted to tell stories, wanted to, work with, at that time, National Geographic was holy grail, right? So that little yellow bordered thing would come home every month and I would pore over it and I'd be like, man, I wish I could one day. And, I'd see some of these photographs that, say, a Michael Nick Nichols clicked of this raging, elephant in Ndoki. It's a blurry photo, but I'm like, good Lord, to be able to witness something like this and then capture it and so on. So those were very aspirational things for me right from when I was very young. But then, of course, all this happened. And so when the paratyphoid happened and I was lying in bed, I think it came to a head where I said, you know what? I really need to do what I want to do, not what I can. And I could do a lot of things. I think if you apply yourself to it, you can do a wide variety of things. It's just a question of, whether you want to make it work or not. And so I could do a lot of things, but I really wanted to do this. And I knew I would have to start from scratch and that there would be no money in it. There isn't any money in this. And so it would be a struggle. But I think collapsing that dichotomy and just making who I am and what I want to be one, there was no other way. I couldn't see my way out of that. It was just, this is it now. I have to do this. And it had happened once before. It had happened when I finished my master's in physics and I was working at TIFR in Bombay in a lab. And 3 months in, I said, okay, this is not me. Overnight, I quit and walked into Society magazine. Do you know?
Mm-hmm. Which year was this?
1994.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
I walked into Society magazine and Suma Varugis was the editor. I just met her in Bombay at Kala Ghoda after all these years. And I told her, thank you. If it wasn't for you taking a chance on me, because I had zero, I had never written anything before. And I was a master's in physics. What would I know? And she said, okay, start work from the Monday. So I was like, wow. And that 1 year that I was in Society, 1.5 years, I realized that this is really, even though it was not nature writing, it was meeting people, it was telling human stories, it was every day was different from the next and the previous, and it was just everything that I had imagined I wanted to do. So I loved those 1.5 years, and I got to work with Suresh Natarajan, who was a photographer, and I was, I would be happy scurrying all over Bombay trying to find something that he needed for some shoot. I was not even shooting, it was just his production designer, but all those things came together, and I was like, I'm having fun. This is really what I want to do. And I was in my element, and I think I was not too bad at all that. But then I got married and went off to the US, and then all these other things happened. So when I came down with Pyrotyphoid in Bangalore, when we had returned from the US, I was still at Intel.
And this is 2007.
2007, yes. I realized that, no, I really need to reclaim myself and who I am. I know this sounds very, very hoo-ha, but I couldn't see myself going back to a corporate job again. And so you're right, that's the dichotomy. And it's hard for people, I can understand, because many times in things that you may want to pursue, that's you, there isn't a way to put food on the table. And I think, again, here I was very privileged. I had a safety net, which is not for everyone, and not everybody has it. And that, I think, was superb. I was always taking loans and paying it back, always. So I'm still doing that even now. But taking loans as in personal loans, so I could, borrow from people I knew. And that was, again, something that made me, that allowed me to do this, allowed me to do. And what you said about Wendell Berry's quote, "What I stand for is what I stand on," that truly defines everything that I believe in today. And I'm sure we'll get to this later, but even anything that I think India or the world is facing, if there was this kind of an ethic that everybody in different places had or followed, and many people do, it's just that they're not listened to. So many people do, and they're not listened to. I think it would be a very different world. It's just I don't know what to say. There's just some honesty about it that helps you be very grounded. There's no way hubris can enter in that kind of situation, because you really know nothing. You know nothing. You're always learning, and so that really brings you to base level, and it's a humility that is very beautiful. I think it's just it is a huge load lifted off your shoulders, and you don't think that there's no need to be somebody. You just kind of just exist. I know that kind of sounds weird.
No, it's very wise, and we'll double click on that. But first I want to go back to sort of the moment of your pause, where again there is a dichotomy in play, which is that when you want to follow a passion, there are two ways of thinking about it. And one way of thinking about it is that, for example, let's say I want to be a photographer. You start thinking about, how will I make a career out of it? Who will publish my photography? Will anyone take me serious? So you think in terms of goals and particular achievements, and you think in terms of a path. Whereas another way of thinking of it is saying that actually I don't care about that. Actually, I love doing this and I want to do it. That's what I want to do. I don't care about any of the other stuff, the practical stuff and all of that. And how was dealing with this dichotomy for you? Because on the one hand, I feel like what that pause would have told you is that I want to do this, whether it is photography or telling stories or whatever, I want to do this. But on the other hand, all the doubts that came would have come from that other side of the equation. That is it practical? Is there a career in this? Will I be taken seriously? Imposter syndrome can also come in quickly here. So, take me through your journey, grappling with this.
I'm still on that journey. Very much still on that journey. You're absolutely right. Those doubts were like mountains, really, huge mountains. And I knew what I wanted to do. Yes, tell stories. Whether I would be taken seriously, whether anybody would publish me, whether I would be able to sustain it, because, day in and day out, it's a very self-starter kind of thing. You have to find the stories. You have to do everything. There's nobody telling you to do anything. So it's that motivation, that energy that has to come from very deep within you. And then, yes, of course, that, who wants to hear what I write, right? Will anybody want to hear what I write or what I say? I have always had a huge imposter syndrome problem. Always. I have never worked in a field in which I have gotten a degree in. I've always moved. It's so funny. I get a degree, then I move. Get a degree, and then I move into something else. And so there was always this: am I enough? Am I qualified? Who am I to say this? All of that. It's still there, very much there. And in 2007, it was doubly kind of intense because I was in a new city. Bangalore was new to me at that time. I'd never lived here before. And I didn't know anyone. And here I wanted to do environmental storytelling. And I knew that for that, I would need to spin up on wildlife biology. I'd need to spin up on hydrology. I didn't know anyone, right? I'd never done this before. And so I was like, how do I begin, and how do I even start? And I think at that time, I always doff my hat to social media. And by about 2009 or so, which is just when I was maybe just gathering steam, because until then, the way I started out was travel storytelling. That's kind of almost the easiest thing to do. You go someplace and you pitch the story then to a magazine or something like that. And luckily, a couple of magazines, I think at that time it was India Today Traveler or something like that, I forget. And Outlook Traveler, a couple of these guys actually published what I was writing, what I was shooting. And it was not the right genre. It was not what I wanted to do, but it was something. It definitely did not pay the bills. So that was really it's just a side note. But I think at that time, I started getting on Facebook and started connecting with, I remember in 2009 in Bangalore, there was, I think, Wild Screens Film Festival or something like that had happened in Cunningham Road or Millers Road or somewhere there. And I had gone there and I was like wide-eyed seeing all these filmmakers, Sandesh Kadur and Kalyan Varma and all these people. And I tried very hesitantly to make friends with them and, try to figure out ways to stay in touch or to learn and stuff like that. And I did a bunch of workshops also with these people. And then I started making connections with wildlife biologists. And I really, really have to thank them because they allowed me to stand on their shoulders. Aprajita Datta, Divya Mudappa, T.R. Shankaraman, people like this and in Sri Lanka, Manori Gunawardena, who's an elephant researcher, excellent. She's taught me so much. I would go to Sri Lanka and spend hours with elephants and then, of course, shoot and write and stuff like that. And she would teach me how to parse it and, what's happening with elephant behavior and so on. Beautiful stuff. And I think I stood on the shoulders of these giants. At the same time, I came to know of S. Vishwanath's work. He does a lot of rainwater harvesting and water work here. And so all of these things, they were like little pieces of the puzzle, but they were all disparate at that point, and I was not quite fitting them in. And again, I kept writing for various little magazines. There was a magazine called, Ashwin Mahesh's thing called India...
Together?
India Together.
Yeah.
India Together. And so I wrote a bunch of articles for them and a lot of good research. And actually, Ashwin taught me he was a great editor. He would ask me such incisive questions, which I had not thought of in field. So I was almost learning on the job. They're beautiful stuff. So a lot of that was happening. And slowly, and this was happening actually 2005, 2006, 2007. I was in Bangalore, I'd not yet quit, and I was doing all these little things on the side. And then, so when I quit, I had these wonderful people, who would help me. But I never, how scientists are also, right? They're very clear about certain things and they're very cut and dried in how they might, give you feedback. And so the imposter in me came up and I was like, oh my God, am I saying this right? So I used to doubt myself, second guess myself and just wonder if I said this, will I get backlash from these guys? That kind of stuff. So very, very diffident, I think is the word. Very diffident. But hesitantly putting, one foot behind the other and keeping on at it. And again, some of these people were really gentle and helped me a lot. So it was very nice. And just slowly built that up. But I don't think that imposter syndrome went off or went away at any point. It kind of rears its head up now and again. It's lesser now than it was then, definitely, but it does come back. And those questions, of am I good enough? Who am I? The one thing that really helped with that was the fact that I was doing the legwork. I was there. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And if somebody in the city was telling me that I was wrong, how could they reconcile what I had seen and heard, So maybe there was, and that's what then started giving me the clue that maybe the way people who are removed from these places saw things is different from the people who have to live in these landscapes and actually go through this kind of stuff. And so there was a story there as well. Just like there is a narrative here in the city, there is a narrative there in those landscapes, which are not any less, because it's true. It's happening. I'm seeing it. This is very much happening. And so for me, I think slowly I started finding the ground beneath my feet. It just becomes a little bit more hard, like firm. And so I kind of am not as hesitant to stand on that. And so that helped. That even today helps me because I know that I've been in these places and I know what it's like. So unless somebody who has also been there and tells me how to see things differently, which also happens often, like there are people who work in those landscapes and me as a newbie going there, I see something and I assume something and then I'm told, no, this is what is actually happening, which is immensely educational as well. Then the imposter syndrome begins to kind of just, the imposter, that voice begins to kind of just get muted a little bit because there is a self-assurance of, okay, I know what I've seen and that's valid.
I sort of wonder, in that journey that you take as a storyteller or an artist or whatever, the role that the forms you're forced to adopt take. Like you pointed out your early stories of Outlook Traveler and all these travel stories, and they have a particular kind of format and a template, and you got to follow those. And at some level, you're forced into a sort of a shallow kind of narrative. And I mean, it is what it is, and that's what you do. And the danger there, it seems to me, is that, the forms that you create in, you're forced to think in those forms. And like when you came into storytelling, were there what was your conception of what do I want to do? Was it a nebulous thing of I want to tell these beautiful stories like these great writers I've read, or did you have a more specific mind? And then when you're forced in these forms, what is the impact that has on you? Because we get good at something by doing it again and again. But if you're going to get good at storytelling by telling Outlook Traveler kind of stories, then that's a deviation from what you would originally have set out to do. So what was your thinking about that? Obviously, eventually you land up doing this kind of long form writing, and thank God for that. But what was that process like? Were there times where, I imagine if I was in your place, I would have felt this gnawing dissatisfaction, but without being able to nail down what it is that I'm dissatisfied about. So what was it like for you?
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. And there was that dissatisfaction. In fact, it came to the fore, I remember, when my first piece, which I had just gotten back from Lhasa, was published on Lhasa. And right in the middle of my words, in the middle of those pages, was an advertisement of something very China. And my whole story was a very different kind of voice. And I was like, I think I was very naive to think that my story would have been understood in a different way. And when I saw that, when I came back from Borneo, in the airport, when I went into a shop and I turned over everything that I wanted to buy because I was hungry, and everything had palm oil in it, and I knew that I was going to write about Borneo, and I knew that I could not bring that part up really, in that Outlook Traveler story, other than one single line maybe somewhere. I realized that is what I don't want to do. And I was very sure about that because Papa's words would ring again in my, I have a very lovely, dear cousin, actually an aunt, but a cousin, who finished her master's in chemistry or something and went into copywriting. So she was in an advertising agency. And I still remember this conversation Papa had with her saying, why are you going to market lies to people, And of course, I mean, she had to earn a living, and she went ahead and she was very good at what she did. And she now is a market researcher, which is different. But I still remembered that. And I was like, do I want to be part of the lie? Do I want to be part of the, well, lie is maybe too strong a word, but the kind of greenwash or the eyewash, the smoke and mirrors kind of thing? Or do I want to tell stories that are unafraid, And so that was something that I had to make that conscious decision, and I knew that I would not be able to continue telling those greenwash kind of stories for very long. Couldn't do it at all. In fact, even when I went out on these wildlife photography expeditions, and we'd be in a jeep in a national park taking photographs from the jeep of these animals, I just knew that that's not really how nature is. And that's like, you're in a little bubble. So very quickly, I gave that up too. Though it taught me a lot, it taught me photography in leaps and bounds. Actually, my photography improved. However, I knew that was also not what I wanted to do. I did not want to tell pretty stories about charismatic animals and, hunky-dory, everything is good kind of stuff, because I knew that wasn't. And so I was very clear that I wanted to do a certain thing, but I did not know if anybody would publish it. And my friend and I, Kalyan Varma, and I would often talk about how so many outlets, Western outlets, don't want to hear the bad news. They don't want to hear conservation stories, even were too much for them, imagine. And so they wanted only, natural history, very good stuff. And we would lament, and I think that's how Peoply was born also, around that time. And so we knew that, telling those hard-hitting stories are not going to find takers in the mainstream media. At least maybe it was not ready at that time. Now it's quite different, maybe. But so that was always going to be a struggle. And I had no idea whether anybody would publish what I wanted to do. No idea. Hindu carried my early stories of conservation, where I talked about hornbill conservation in Pake, which is Aprajita Datta's work. And I went and spent some time there and wrote about that, which is, I think even today, it's just one of those amazing stories, not without its messiness, but it's still it's a good story. And so, I was doing a little bit of that. So Hindu and some of these other places Mint would be happy to carry some of these stories, but not something where they'll say, okay, we are going to commission you to do a series, because some of these things need to be series, it's not one-offs. So that question always remained, whether anybody would want to read, but I just knew that I wanted to do it.
Do you remember any instance where you report on a story in those early days, and what you notice and what you think is the essence of what your story is not what you can write about, but you have to write about something else? Do you remember something like that?
I don't remember, because I never allowed myself to do those kinds of things. I would say no. In fact, there would be certain outlets which had a certain ideology that I would not even want to engage with. So I never wrote for... Don't
take names, but what kind of ideology?
Oh, like the forest kind of ideology, where people have to be outside and it has to be pristine nature kind of stuff, where I knew I would never want to write stuff like that, because that's not how it is. So some of those things, some of the things where people would say, oh, but big dams are also necessary, that kind of stuff. Anything where it was not quite so honest. And it was very much a propaganda or something, some agenda that was being pushed either by a funder or by an ideology or by something which didn't sit well with me, and which I knew is not easy to take the other tack, to take the opposite tack, but which I knew needed to be said, because that is the direction we eventually want to move in, because the other direction is what has gotten us into the soup.
And as you sort of started doing these stories and delving deep, what were the kind of preconceptions which shifted, like the things that had been normalized. For example, in your book, in Margin Lands, what I was very struck by was the nature of borders. For example, at one point you write, desert dwellers recognize borders observed by birds, outlines that are thoughtful, meaningful, natural, inspired by geology, with no written documentation to guide them. They rely on memory and nuance, on a visceral interaction with the land, and they are one with it. Elsewhere, you have this great sentence, "A Ganga moves, the borders move with them," right? With reference to, I think, what was happening in Jharkhand and Bengal, and, they were fighting over the land because a damn river kept moving around. So obviously the state borders change.
Yeah.
And that's, again, something that for most of my life, I never questioned the lines on a map of what a nation state is. And it's only in recent years that I've begun to think that not just in terms of geology, not just in terms of bird movements, but little things like cuisines, or little things like, just the clothes people wear, or languages or dialects or whatever, that there are so many shifting fluid borders, almost a multitude of borders, that in a sense is framed that we look at that this is a country and that is a border, and Jharkhand ends here and Bengal begins here, is this ridiculous artificial frame of looking at the natural world, and almost serves as a metaphor for our overall attitude towards the natural world, where we try to put it into boxes and so on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yes, the border thing. So there are biogeographic regions, right? And that's what I meant by what the birds recognize, where they don't see a line on a map. This is how they migrate. Not just birds, right? Caribou in the north, in Lapland, and the Maasai with their herds. Our own shepherds here, they walk past borders. They work in Tibet, for example, in Ladakh, for example, which is part of Tibet. There you go again. See, Ladakh is the westernmost part of Tibet, the Tibetan plateau, and the Changpa herders live on both sides, and these are grazing lands, and they migrate. They don't even migrate; they just move across. Right? There are these fluid movements that happen. And we are the ones who have drawn that line and have forced people, whether it is Punjab, Pakistan versus Punjab, India, whether it is Bangladesh, whether West Bengal, whether it is Cooch Behar and northern Bangladesh, whatever. We have drawn these borders and created these artificial boundaries which rivers don't recognize, birds don't recognize, animals don't recognize, and neither do the people who live with the land. It doesn't serve them well at all. So that is something that I think I knew at a visceral level, but then I saw it playing out when I went to Bangladesh. And my trip to Bangladesh was very early on in my journey in storytelling, so 2014. And I noticed things that were happening in northern Bangladesh with the Chitmahal and all those parts, and just along the Tista, which stunned me so much that I came back. And then, so I think I've always been blessed with people who have guided me, people who have been one with the land and who have guided me accordingly. Like two people in Assam, Professor Chandan Mohanta and Professor Arupjyoti Shoikya, or both of them from Assam, and both of them who just heard me intuitively when I told them what I had just seen in Bangladesh and had gone to Assam after that. And they told me how to parse this information and what's really happening and so on. And there's, whether I was right in this, whether I was wrong in this and so on. So those kinds of preconceived notions of, yes, this is a boundary and this is where this land ends and that land begins. It's not tenable. It's not sustainable. At some point, because of the way nation states operate also, you are going to find problems crop up. And they have. It's happened in Bangladesh. It's happened in India. It's happened anytime there is a transboundary river, right? Like there's a river coming from China to India, India to Bangladesh. There's going to be issues, right? So there's all those kinds of things. So that was one big thing. This whole thing of even forests, right? And how national parks are seen and so on. It was a huge education to me about community conservation and so on. And none of it is easy. None of it is a right or wrong answer. There are these very messy situations that even people who are whole hog in one camp, they have to deal with it, and it's not easy. So I realized that while I want to say something which is honest or truthful or something, there are different colors to all of that. And so I think those things also, each time I went back to places, I would discover something, I would uncover something different, which would inform me differently. And so it kind of built upon. Sometimes I had to take off one layer and then, start again and build and so on. So it was almost like a cumulative knowledge gathering process. Sometimes it's like a tapestry, right? You're building a little bit, and you're creating something which then doesn't seem maybe right. Something else sits on top of it. There are many layers. So it's not a quick and dirty, fast, clean process.
I think I agree with you that the world is deeply complex. There's no black and white, and different viewpoints can often be simultaneously, can have different aspects of the truth. But what I do think is that whereas I wouldn't necessarily jump to judging different views, I would jump to judging different ways of seeing. That there is a way of seeing where you go in without preconceived notions and you just take everything by osmosis. You just observe, you take the ego out of it, you take the self out of it, you let things happen, and then whatever you come up with, it's a good faith effort to make sense. And then there is another way of seeing, which is that you come with, I can't think of a visual equivalent to the phrase blunt tool, but you come with a blunt vision, like the state often does, where you do not have the capacity to take in complexity or the humility to be open to it. So you apply a fixed frame to everything, and then that is it, and all your judgments are based on that frame. And within the limited context of that frame, a lot of the things that you believe might seem justified. But if you were just to open yourself up, you would realize that it's sort of different. And whenever one writes a story, especially when one is young, it becomes difficult to sort of let go one's preconceived notions, because it is natural to come at something thinking that, hey, I'm intelligent, I look at things in a good way, I can see things others can't, and etc., etc. And that ego can then get in the way of learning. So what was that, and you've used the term humility before, what was that process of discovering and cultivating that humility, of recognizing that, all of these people you're talking to, when you're a reporter from the city, they can sort of be a tendency that there's almost a natural hierarchy in place. You have come from somewhere, they are a subject, they are telling you things, you're noting it down pompously, and, crafting narratives in your head with beautiful phrases.
Yes.
And from your writing, it's evident that at least at the time of all the stories in margin lands and all that, you're not doing that. You're just sinking in. You're almost. So what is that like? Was it easy for you to straight away sink into that role where you're just a curious observer and you're open to everything, or did you also have to fight these battles within yourself?
So here's where the imposter stood me well. So I would go to those places and I'd say, who am I? What do I know? And so that was also good, So very early on, thanks to Chattar Singh and people like him, thanks to Manori, people like her, I was really just a sponge. And I knew that. I did not know. I haven't studied any of these things. I've never been in many of these places before. I haven't studied sociology, none of this, right? I'm really a blank slate. And so for me, sometimes that can even, anybody can tell me anything and I can believe it. But I didn't believe it blank. I mean, I was not stupid, but I was willing to listen to everyone. And it was interesting because then I started finding people who were willing to teach. And there were different people we would meet, and these guys would also show me a way to parse what I'm hearing, which was so helpful. Like, for example, I'll give you an example where it's very easy for me to think that all shepherds in Rajasthan live with the land and know what's good for the land, right? Because I've met Chattar Singh, I've met all his cohort, I've met everybody who talks like this and who... It's just all very beautiful and lovely. One day we're in the desert, and we meet a shepherd, and I stop the car. We're going to some other place, and so I stop the car and I tell Chattar Singh, I want to go talk to him. Do you know him? Chatar Singh doesn't know him. So I'm like, fine, let me go. So I go and I'm walking with this man. He's herding his goat and sheep through Sevan grass, high Sevan grass. And I talk to him and I ask him about various things. We're just talking, where's he from, what's he doing and all of that. And, this is again 2 years into a drought. And so I'm asking him, what does he think about the water situation? He's very far from the Khadeen. What does he think? So I'm just talking. And he says something like, yeah, I'm waiting for the government to put a tube well, and then all our problems will be solved. And so there are people everywhere who have different narratives, right? Who believe in different things. But there is the land which tells you a certain way to live that is right, because that is your ultimate, right? If you go against the land, things are going to happen. I mean, this is not just me speaking or anything. It's just unfortunate, but that's how it is. So I came back to Chatar Singh and I told him this is what he said. He said, and so he has bought into that narrative. And then Chatar Singh proceeds to tell me that the reason why shepherds are dependent upon hand-dug percolation wells, which are very shallow percolation wells, is that they'll dig a well, the water will come up, the sheep, the flock will graze and will graze around there, come there for the water, and then that water will be gone. You keep pulling up from a shallow well, you pull up from the well and the water's gone. So then that flock has to move until you dig another well in a different place, which also helps that this place doesn't get overgrazed. So, there is a rhythm to that kind of life, which will be completely disrupted if there is a borewell. And so then there is the chance that grasslands will get overgrazed, and then it's going to become a dust bowl, and so other things will happen, and so on. And so, these kinds of connections, what would I know coming from the city, right? I know nothing. I didn't even at that time know. I mean, I'd spoken to people like Vishwanath, so I knew borewells were not what we should do and why and all that. But imagine, right, if you come from a city and you're going there and somebody says, jab borewell, Swadesh, he comes and builds a borewell, right? Shah Rukh Khan. And everybody loved the movie. But if you are slightly ecologically bent, you know that, oops, that is, that was a quick fix. But it may not, and again, it all is dependent upon where that exact place was and, particulars of that area. But it may not have been the right way. It was a quick way. And usually quick ways are not the right ways. So all those kinds of little things, what would I know, right? So for me, all of Margin Lands was just one huge learning curve. Like, it just keeps going up. Even now, it keeps going up. Everywhere I go, I just came back from Kutch late last year. Huge learning curve, seeing what's happening there and what the people are facing there and how life can be lived, how life is being lived, what's happening. And, I went there, I'll tell you a clear preconceived notion I went there with. I went there with this preconceived notion that there's a lot of that invasive Prosopis juliflora there. And so for me, if it's invasive, root it out, take it out, right? And I've heard that even in Rajasthan, there is charcoal to be made from Prosopis juliflora. So great, you can make charcoal and stuff like that. And then I go to Kutch and I hear there that the politicians have said, go forth and remove the invasives, right? Take it all off and make your charcoal and make a living out of it and so on. Then the people over there who are slightly more educated about the land tell me, how many people really know to tell a Prosopis juliflora from a native babool? Not too many. How many of them, when they take their JCBs to uproot, because these things have deep roots, to uproot this Prosopis juliflora, don't uproot all the native vegetation with it, right? That's one. And then we are driving at night. We're coming back from a place where we've gone bird watching. We're coming back from a place. We're passing through these villages and you can't see. Visibility is zero because they're burning that for charcoal and you can't breathe. And it's thick black smoke. And these are people, the villagers who are living there, they're burning it there. And so you go with the preconceived notion of, yes, you have to root out, great that they're taking out invasives and the government mandate to take out invasives. And you see that everything is nuanced and it's not all that it's cut out to be, right? Everything is, so if you do something quick, like quick fix, take out everything, right? So you are going to probably land in hot water. So, slow, considered, which is not necessarily economically the best route, is usually in long term economically the best route. So
I want to ask about when you start doing these stories, like the initial way of learning what's going on is you go and you try to talk to people, and in your halting language, in their halting language, you find a way to communicate, and it's incredibly shallow and you know nothing at the end of it. Then as you spend more and more time, you figure out better ways to learn. And I'm just thinking about the immense complexity of language and how tacit knowledge is contained. For example, in your book, you mention a few of the words that they have, which, words like a chinto for a drizzle or ghutyo for what you describe as the asphyxiating stillness of clouds that blanket the sky without giving way to rain. What a lovely description. And they have one lovely word for that. And here pointing out that these specific things have specific words for them is only a metaphor for also saying that there is so much local knowledge that is in a sense impossible to communicate. They know it in their bones. At one point you pointed out about how Chattar Singh is talking to you about his son, and he's saying that my son is not learning any of this. He is being trained by the education system to be a slave of the 31st, which is where you get your salary. And I thought that's such a lovely phrase.
Yes, indeed.
Such a, it cannot come from a city dweller. It needs to come from someone who is outside looking in so they can see the absurdity of the phenomenon. And I'm just thinking that all this tacit knowledge is not written down. It's contained in the lived experiences and in the everyday wisdom of all of these people, and what they can communicate even to someone like you who's spending months and months there and making herself completely open is a fraction of this. And it is not even as if the next generation takes it on. Their next generation is, trained for a quote-unquote modern world where priorities are different and all of that. And this is lost forever. And I'm thinking, if this is lost forever, once a language disappears and the words disappear, then there is no way out. Then it is no longer sort of a battle between one statist ideology and a more bottom-up way of thinking of the world. It is just then the natural progression of things that this shit will happen.
Yeah. And I think Barry Lopez puts it beautifully where, he has this essay called American Geographies. Brilliant essay. And he puts it really well where he says that if you are not intimately aware of your local geography, then the interlopers, the charlatans, the people with huge marketing budgets, they will come and they are happy to take it over. And that is what is happening to large swathes of India today. Any place in the world, actually, not just India and not just today. It's been happening, right? So that awareness, that understanding, that observation, and that connection with the land, that elemental connection with that land, with the water, we need to reclaim it, and it doesn't mean that we need to go back to places or something like that to reclaim it. We need to reclaim it in Bellandur, for example, where I live. What is right, Where is it? Is it in a valley? I mean, it's built over so badly now that you can't even tell what the geography used to be. And so where, what is right for Bellandur is not probably what's right for Whitefield, which is the very next, suburb and so on. So if you don't know, and if we don't know it, who will, right? Somebody sitting in the Vidhan Sauda or somebody sitting in Delhi is obviously not going to know it. So if you can't stand up for what you stand on, then be prepared to lose it. And then we are going to be down a slippery slope. We are already on that, actually. And interesting that you bring up that thing about Chinto and Ghutyo. It happened where we were sitting in a courtyard and drinking tea. And it was summer and there was dust storm and all of that. And I asked Chattar Singh, I tell him, oh, looks like it's going to rain. And he said, no. I said, no. He was facing me. So I said, no, turn around and look there. He said, I don't need to look. I know it's not going to rain. Then I said, how do you know? So he said, he called it something. I forget now. It was Paas or something. So I was like, no, but then I said, what is that? And then he said, this is that and that is that. And then he started pointing out all these there were 3-4 different clouds above us. And he said, these and none of these will rain. And you'll have to wait until it becomes kala for it to rain. And I was like, that's, and then that's when the storyteller in me said, good Lord, there's a story here, It was just a chance conversation where I said, and then he's the kind of guy, you can't tell him, okay, tell me all the names of clouds. Not like that. Then you spend day as and when whichever cloud comes, he's going to point out and tell you what it is, which is why I don't have all 40, because not all 40 showed up, right? So, but even that awareness to be able to read the land, it's so important. It's so important. Or read the river. Like in my there's a guy who's a boat master who's from Bihar, and he reads the Brahmaputra like the back of his hand, and he knows exactly how to go and what to do and so on. Where to find food, where to find fish, where to find eel. These things will be lost to us, with that generation passing on, because all of them have, because we told them to, put their kids in colleges, engineering colleges, or BA in history or something like that. What is that going to do? They don't know how to fish anymore.
This is also a crazy dichotomy that one wishes didn't exist between an old way of doing things, which is all this tacit knowledge but is not written down in a systematic way, and also a new way of looking at the world, which when it looks at these subjects can be like so shallow and so blunt. And as a story lover, I of course love the stories in your book, but I also love the stories within stories, which are the stories that these people tell themselves or have told themselves through time about the things around them. For example, and I hope I pronounce them right, so if any biologists are listening to this and they don't like, I'm sorry, everybody, my pronunciations are terrible. So you mentioned this thing called Palithoa toxica, right? And it's something that grows on a rock and is poisonous, and you almost put your hand on it, and thank goodness you didn't. And the story behind this was so beautiful. It is a myth of a hunchback who is atop a mountain, a hunchback hermit, and one day the fishermen decide that the fishermen keep vanishing, so it is a hunchback's fault, and they go up, and while beating him up, they notice that on a part of his body there is a mouth of a shark.
Yes.
And then they realize that he goes swimming every day, and when he's back, a fisherman is missing. So they slaughter him, and after they slaughter him, these Palithoa toxica start appearing on rocks, and if you touch them, it's poisonous and they'll kill you. Another story I loved, and it was also moving in a way, as how human beings accept their lot. This was a story about bheel fatalism.
Yes.
Where you point out, Shiva and Parvati one day look at the bheel farmers and they decide we must help them. So first they put a silver pot in their way, but they ignore it. Then Parvati says, let us give them a bull. We'll send Nandi, and Nandi goes. And the bheel farmers apparently don't realize it's a special bull, so they kill the bull. And Parvati gets pissed off and she says, okay, a curse upon you. You will never be able to farm properly again, which is why those are barren lands. And this is a convenient myth for them to then be fatalistic and believe that, oh shit, we are screwed. This is the way it always will be, right? And I think about these lovely stories, which are not very different from science. I mean, we understand the world by telling stories about it. These are early stories. Science is later stories based on deeper observation, and many of it obviously is pretty close to the truth. But the thing is that when governments come with their preconceived notion, when you look at it in a top-down kind of way, you miss all the beautiful nuance. And I keep wondering that this is the dichotomy, and a real dichotomy and not a false one, that we need to bridge, that there has to be a way to get to capture some of that knowledge about the 40 ways of clouds and kind of put it out there. And both ways of thinking that arise seem so simplistic to me, and one tragically simplistic and the other just foolishly and bullheadedly simplistic. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, putting it out there is one thing, Amit, but then who's listening, right? Like, for example, many people come to meet Chatar Singh because there is never-ending water in the deep Thar where there is no water to be seen, right? So there are collectors, there are various other people, there are chief ministers, there's all kinds of ministers who will come to meet him to say, "Aap batao kya kar rahe ho? Kaise hai? Ye kaise ho raha hai? Ye pani ka aapko problem kaise nahi hai?" That kind of thing. And he shows them everything. He tells them the whole thing. Does anything happen? Next thing we know is borewells are being dug there. He called me the other day saying borewells are being dug here now. All over. That's going to destroy the ecosystem completely, right? It's going to destroy even these villages, these far-flung villages. Granted, there aren't too many people there, but it's going to completely destroy an ecosystem as well as the wildlife that depends upon it, as well as these goat and sheep that depend upon it, the desert goat and sheep. So putting it out there is one thing. But is anyone willing to listen, I think, is the question. And when I was in Bengal, my guide there, North Bengal, Tarikul Bhai, he told me, very clearly, he said that, how can you wake someone who only pretends to be asleep?
Wow.
That is just exactly what it is. It's not that these guys don't know that there is another way. It's just that, is anybody willing to do what it takes? It doesn't take too much. That's the problem, maybe. There is not that much money that needs to be doing. You don't need that much money to do a lot of these things. And maybe people want things which are a lot of money, concrete and whatnot. And so for build and then create. Even here in Bangalore, for example, there's going to be a huge drought this year in summer. They're saying, summer is going to be terrible because there's been less rain and so on. And so now the immediate question, the talk is about yet another dam, Mekidatu, which keeps coming up. But the question is, are we doing enough in the city itself to stem the rot, Bangalore gets 2x the amount of rain required for domestic consumption. 2x. We don't even hold half of it. We're getting everything from Kaveri, right? Or bore wells, worse. Now the question is, with rainwater and with grey water, we could do so much, right? And there are enough and more people who have been talking about this for years, like Vishwanath, like many others. Who's listening? So the question really is, do we want to listen? Do we want to listen to simple? Do we want to reclaim a land ethic, or do we want to impose our ethic on the land?
So for all my listeners, I do have an episode with Vishwanath as well, but it was way back in the early days where I did they were miniatures. So this was like 40 minutes. So maybe I should call him in and take some 40 hours from him or something. And
please do, because such wisdom, you need a lot of people to hear this kind of wisdom.
Yeah, but even in those 40 minutes, he kind of opened my eyes, and I remember my listeners found it very sort of enlightening. And I have never looked at borewells the same way again. I can promise you that. Yeah. Let's go back to your journey. We'll come back to all of this later and in a much deeper way, but let's go back to your journey. The first time I noticed your work, frankly, was not as a storyteller, but for the incredible mind-blowing photography, right? Which just blew me away. It was absolutely like when I was a kid, although I had no aspirations to anything to do with National Geographic, I would still look at that as a gold standard. And, you can make out what is a National Geographic photograph, and your photographs were exactly in that class.
Thank you very much. No, You're very kind.
It's evident. I mean, this is just stating the obvious. So I want to know about your journey in photography also. Like, how do you start? Because, today, we live in the golden age of the creator economy where equipment is relatively cheap, learning is relatively cheap. You can learn everything, do courses, and etc., etc. Back in the day, in the 80s and all that, like, there used to be this Japanese saying, if you want to make a man a pauper, give him a camera. Like, photography was mind-blowingly expensive.
Still today.
Yeah, I mean, but at least at least not in terms of film. I think they meant in terms of film. At least I understand that, even I will occasionally, look at these lenses and say, oh my God, wow, this is great. 4 lakhs! So, yeah. So, it could not have been an easy journey for you. It must have been bloody difficult. So, how did you get good, and how did you gain the aesthetic in this case? The aesthetic of understanding what makes for a good photograph. What do I need to do to turn what I see in front of me into something that can wow people and look like a National Geographic photo?
Thank you very much. You're very, very kind, Amit. I must say, though, that the writers think I'm a photographer. The photographers think I'm a writer who shoots.
You're amazing at both. So
no. I think I'm in neither.
Let's not do boxing nonsense. I disagree. I will fight that. Yeah.
Anyway, so my grandfather always went everywhere with his camera, his Agfa Soli 2, little camera, and he went everywhere with that. And I used to be always like, can I shoot with that, please? Types. And so when my father also got, you remember we used to have those long cameras, the Kodak ones. So that one, I would carry it everywhere. So even in college and school, if there was an ethnic day or an annual day or something, I would be the one with the camera taking photographs. So it was always my passion. Love it. I just absolutely love it. So that was always been there. And I think it again comes down to, I think, seeing. And I think I always liked art. I love teaching myself art as well. So it just comes down to seeing. And I think you can train yourself to see a certain way. And then, of course, if you lift your camera, and the rest is mechanics, right? So it's just that. But I must say that a lot of the friends I made along the way post 2009, 2010 or so, like Kalyan, and then I went on where I was co-teaching this course with Jayant Sharma and so on. We went to places, and I would listen to them and speak. So the mechanics I started picking up from them. The aesthetic is I guess mine. I don't know. I've never given it much thought, but that's what it is, I think. But also realized that I can never be just one or the other, So if someone were to say that you write the story, we'll send a photographer with you, I'll always have my camera. I'll always shoot. I will, because I just see things in a certain way, and then that also informs my writing. So for me, it's a package. It's a storytelling package. Sound, stills, video, and words. It's like the storytelling package, right? And then the smells come from description, but whatever. So for me, it was always, I think, the mechanics were learned more recently and I'm not a gadget kind of person, so I don't have the latest, greatest camera. I'm never, new cameras come, let me go get that kind of thing. What gets the job done? So for me, very often the phone has become my go-to. And in fact, just the other day, I was telling people that I think about 4 or 5 book covers, my photos have made it to 4 or 5 book covers. They're all phone photos.
Wow.
So
it's about how you see, the tool.
It's really that, It's not about the equipment. So that, I think, is just... and again, it's in the story. So when you're a storyteller, I guess you start noticing details, and then you start shooting it where those details come out and so on. So it really has to do with observation. I think if you can teach yourself to observe, or to slow down and observe and pay attention, a lot of things will become much clearer, and you'll even become good at it. I don't buy this thing where people will say, "Oh, I'm not an artist. I can't draw to save my life." You just haven't tried. That's what I tell them. How many hours have you put into it? Like, how many hours have you put into observing something that you want to describe, right? And I know that when I'm drawing something, I'm observing so much more than when I'm photographing it. So again, it's a training. You just kind of train yourself. So now when I pick up the camera, I'm looking for those details which I know I will need when I want to draw something, right? So I think it was Diane Hubris who said that the camera is something that teaches you to see without a camera.
Wow.
And that really is what it is, You start seeing a certain way, but then when you're just looking at stuff, you start seeing light, the way it falls. There's a play, there's composition. There's just so many things that start falling into place that it just informs even your writing aesthetic. Even your writing improves with just observations. I think observation becomes your biggest aesthetic.
Tell me a little bit more about this interplay between these different forms and how they aid seeing in the other form, like photography, writing. Prem mentioned that you learn drawing super fast, right? You just learn everything really fast.
No.
So that's what I've been told, and Prem is a credible source, so I will believe him over you on this matter. And
No. You have to discount everything he says by 90%. He's too generous.
No, he is generous, but I won't discount by 90%. So my question is that then, when... like, assuming you're only doing photography, right? What you'd be drawn to then is a beautiful frame. What you'd be drawn to then is something that makes for a great picture and tells a story within that picture, but that story need not necessarily be a story of the whole thing. Mm-hmm. But when you're also writing about it, you're getting deeper, you're trying to figure out the essence. Like you said, that you might then focus your camera on a different set of details because those are the telling details. And now the camera and the writing are in this sort of interplay between each other, and what you said about photographing, learning photography is like learning to see without a camera, and that's such a beautiful, and I guess that plays all of these in play into each other. Then drawing also plays into that, and vice versa. So tell me a little bit about that. Like, how do you think your photography, like these days when you go out and take photographs, are you always doing it from a storytelling point of view? And if you don't do it from a storytelling point of view, or before when you didn't do it from that point of view, how was it different, and how have they sort of influenced each other?
I think I've always seen it from a storytelling point of view. I can't think of a single No, I can't think of a single time that it might be opportunistic, it might be speculative, but it is still informing some story. Maybe it may not be the story that I'm working on professionally at the time, but I am seeing with respect to something, like something, either a geography or something which is going to fit somewhere. And I think that's the scientist in me. I'm just seeing things because they're all data points for me. And like even when I'm on a flight, just the other day, in fact, I was looking through my photographs and I realized that I had taken this flight from Paro in Bhutan to Delhi. And of course, I had to sit on the right-hand side of the plane because your Himalayas are going to be there. And it helped me because I shot incessantly. I shot from Kanchenjunga all the way, then Everest, and everything was clear that day. It was just a beautiful, beautiful trip. So Kanchenjunga, Everest, Annapurna, and then and on and on and on and on until we come to the plains of Nepal and then Delhi. I can even see Nanga Parbat at the back, whatever, all of that, Nanda Devi at the back, all of that. And it was just beautiful. And I was looking at these photographs and I realized that thanks to doing that, I have flown right over Mount Kailash. And I can see, if I want to tell a story about Brahmaputra, which is Yarlang Sangpo, which begins from there, I have my, the thing from the air right there. And that's only because I sat at a obsessively clicking at a window seat because I said, the Himalayas, I'm going to be traveling the length of the Himalayas, and who gets to see this, And at some point I know I will be telling these stories. So I think it's that, and it's constantly at the back of my mind, whatever it may be, whether it's a structure or a little creature or if it is something. In fact, even just the way I post, and again, this comes back to my obsessive phone thing during interludes. I post a lot. And if I've shot a creature, I go back, I research about it, and I post the story about it. So I may not have shot knowing the story, but I'm curious enough to go back and find the story to tell the story with the picture. So it all goes together.
You once called a bumblebee a tailor bee, I think, or vice versa.
Yeah. Yes, a carpenter bee, a bumblebee. And then, of course, my wildlife biologist friends were quick to point out that I was wrong. But it's fun, that kind of learning is fun. And you say, oops. See, that's again, because I'm not trained in that, I have no rep to protect. What do I know, yaar? Okay, fine. It's not a bumblebee. It's a carpenter bee. But it's lovely starting from zero, in a field because you don't know anything. So.
And I think starting from zero, like my guest yesterday, Soumya Dhanraj, read her first book at the age of 16. Her dad worked in a factory. Her mom sold tea at a tea stall, read her first book at the age of 16. And in some ways, as I, my conversation with her continued yesterday, I realized that in some ways that was an advantage because there were no preconceptions about anything. She was asking, when she was in college, she was asking questions that others would be too embarrassed to ask, like, what is a stock market? Right? Because we have these impressionistic views of things and words in the world, which we never question. What is this? Why is it this way? And I think that, being able to start at zero and ask those basic questions, which nobody else has, normal people don't think about. I think there's a great advantage to that. And in a sense, the fact that, you joined Society in 94, worked there for a while, it might even be an advantage that you spent a lot of years away, because then when you come back, you haven't gotten trapped by any of the hidebound conventions of that world. Absolutely. You can just come at it completely fresh. And with that regard, I want to ask you, earlier when you said that I learned to see, I learned observation. Take me through what that means, because that implies a level of intentionality. It is not just about open your eyes and capture what is there, but no, see in a different way, see with a different intensity, which could require looking deeper or which could require even looking less intently and just letting things happen. So tell me about that process of learning to see.
It came with my shadowing all these wildlife biologists, the Divya Mudapas, the Aprajita Dattas of the world, Manoris of the world, because that's how they see, right? They'll be walking along and then they'll see a fern, which everybody else will pass by, but they'll pick it up and they'll say, hey, this is this, or they'll point out to you if you're interested enough, and they'll say this is what it is, or a little creature like a small insect, or they'll say, why is this tree growing here? It's a lowland tree or something like that, right? And I'm just making stuff up, but that kind of observation is there in people who do research on those landscapes, right? So. And when you walk with people like Chatar Singh, it's because they use it, right? They'll say, this is tumba. And, he shows me a small gourd-like creature, which is used to feed somebody or something else. And then he'll point out to a grass and say, this is the most nutritious grass for goat. And that this grass is being lost, right? So they are the people who are observing. They observe for survival or for their job, right? And here I am tagging along with them and learning to see that this also has a part in the landscape. This also has a part in that big fabric, of how things work. And that teaches me that I need to also keep looking, and I'm going to also, and of course, I don't know what I'm seeing often. Then I'm taking photos of it to then go find out what is it that I'm seeing. So it's then, fitting retroactively into place and so on. So that is very important. And then I must say that the start of my journey in January of 2013 in the desert was with Pradeep Krishan, Harsha and Payal. We would go out from Jaisalmer into the deep desert and just walk. No agenda other than to understand the place. So Pradeep is walking and stopping at everything and asking, what is this? What is that? He also doesn't know. He's also learning. He's teaching himself. The man has taught himself botany, and he's better than any field botanist today. He's just amazing. So he goes and he stops and he sees things, and he sees a certain geology, and he asks the question. And he says, what is this? And why is it like that? And what might this have been called long time ago, because this feature is so different from this feature here. Does this feature have a name? And then we go around asking people. So here we are treating this landscape as a laboratory, constantly investigating different things. And that was just superb. So your learning goes from zero, just like exponentially higher, and it's so rich. You come back and you're making notes every day. You're learning things like crazy amounts, and you're going back and searching also. You're doing research and so on. And so then when I would go and meet Chatar Singh, I would see the other part of it. Here we're looking at it from a botany perspective. He's telling you from the cultural perspective. Here's how it's used. And then those two things come together. And so it's just beautiful, So that kind of observation, I love being with people. Even this time when I was in Kutch, I happened to meet two people who are like that, who see the landscape, ask questions, learn, and try to connect things up. How it dovetails into either culture or survival and so on. And I think I've been very fortunate to be in the company of such people. That's the way I think I learned to see. And again, I think going back to my parents, my mother, because her father was a botanist, she would constantly be asking, what is this tree? So let's find out what this tree is and what this plant is, what this flower is, and so on. So there was that botany angle. And then, of course, because of Papa and our interest in birds and animals, we have that, so constantly asking questions. I think it's just that. And it's all of us scientists in the family. So the scientific temper of just curiosity and asking questions, that kind of just is there. So, and I think that's all it is, just that's how I learned to see, or I'm still learning to see. And each time, even now, somebody else will point out something and I'm like, damn, how come I didn't even notice that, So then learn to see that and so on.
It strikes me that one danger with learning to see like this is knowing when to stop. Because obviously it is true that the more you slow life down and the more you observe, the more you'll see, because the world is infinitely complex. But infinitely complex is exactly the thing that the danger then would just be that you just sit in one place constantly. There is no movement. You're just seeing. The question is, when do you stop? Like what happens right now is there are many simple stories people tell about the world. Sure, you learn to see a little better and you tell more complex stories. But you can just see and it can get more and more complex. And because what you are also trying to do is see a bit more and tell a better story than that existing story. But no one can ever tell the full story. Chattar Singh doesn't know the full story. Pradeep Kishan doesn't know the full story. No one knows the full story. So is it then necessary that there has to be in this a balance where you balance the pleasure and the process of sinking into this new reality you're discovering with an instrumentality, with an end, that I have to write a book out of this or I have to do a long form out of this, and that something like that, however heartbreaking it is necessary to allow you to stop? Like, is this something you've grappled with?
Do you mean by pleasure as in when I'm in landscapes or when I'm not in landscapes?
When you're in landscapes.
When I'm in landscapes, very much so. So, as Prem will tell you too, I can't take more than maybe 2-3 days at a stretch of this deep investigation. Mm-hmm. After that, I need 2 days off. Because I need to, assimilate, make connections for myself, but also soak in the place. Just be there. Otherwise I'm constantly on and, it's very taxing. I get headaches. So then, I just stop, and 2 days I will not talk to people. I don't want interviews. When somebody else will say, no, you have to meet this person, I'm like, day after tomorrow, not today, not tomorrow. So those 2 days, I will go out in the land and I will just roam. I will just see and I will just feel it, I really just, I can't, or sometimes I even just sit in one place and just feel. Just like, this is it. Now, this is all that I know, and it's slowly sinking in somewhere, I think, but it's not top of mind, and I'm not obsessively writing or, doing any research or anything. I'm just letting it be. Interestingly, what I found, Amit, is that those 2 days always help because it brings things into perspective. When you go out on the third day, you've made subconsciously you've made some connections, which then you want to probe and see if this is going to bear out, And so those things are not very necessary. Those are not very apparent when you're looking so close. Those large connections of this connecting to this is not very apparent when you're going like this, So, and then when you start probing those things, it starts making sense, And then the whole tapestry is coming into view, or some part of it is coming into view, which makes sense. And so, that then, and even films about the place, just kind of go to different, like somebody's poetry, read the newspaper, what's going on in that place, different things. So completely removed from your primary research that you're doing. You just go off and do something completely different. And that I just need every 2-3 days max. I think I can go, and then afterwards I need some like that interlude of just doing things by myself, just being and trying to assimilate. And that helps because then I actually also get, sometimes when I'm in Calcutta, for example, I just ride the tram. I get in at Esplanade, get off at Sham Bazaar or something, then get in somewhere else, come back. I'm just sitting on the tram and just watching everybody. I'm doing nothing, not taking photos, nothing. I'm just sitting and watching. And they'll be so amused. People will come and talk to me. People will tell me things. I have noticed all kinds of things, just it's just amazing, just almost turning your brain on some kind of a different, not autopilot, but it's just cruising, and you're watching things. Or if I'm in the Sundarban or something, I get on a boat or, something like that. So it's just very, it brings things together.
And I'm thinking that these are both different and important ways of seeing, in the sense that when you say that you sit on a tram and you just go from the beginning to the end and you won't take a single picture, you'll just sit and see. And I'm thinking that there are two ways of seeing here. And one is intense seeing, when you have a camera in your hand and you're looking for a photograph to take that captures something and, you're looking with that intensity. And the other way of seeing is that that intensity isn't there. You're coasting, as you said. You're just cruising, rather, as you said. And things are happening, and, you might see something that you would have kind of missed otherwise. Like, there is that famous cognitive psychology experiment where this bunch of kids are told to watch a basketball game and see how many times a ball bouncing. And, and they miss a gorilla. And I worry.
I use that in my photography classes.
Oh, wow.
That's the first thing I show.
My God, wow. And what is the point you make with that?
Exactly this. The fact that when you're so intent on seeing something and you're looking for something, or you're looking for how many times the black shirt or the white shirt touches the ball or whatever, that you miss a gorilla walking across the damn thing. I mean, you're going to miss things, and so you need to have the situational awareness. That's the point I'm trying to make over there. And that's exactly what I try to put into place when I'm like this, because then you'll see how people interact. So when you're looking through a frame, you're not necessarily aware of what's happening outside the frame. And there are interactions, there are personal things, there are people yelling, screaming, fighting, shouting, or a mother, holding on to a baby, or, something. You see what a person has bought, what is in that person's, bag. You see what footwear somebody's wearing. You see the tiredness on somebody's face. You see what mithai somebody is eating. You see how many cups of, the chai, the kulhads are all lying in one place. You won't necessarily photograph that. You'd be photographing something else, maybe him doing that, long thing, but you don't notice. But then, when you're not with the camera, you're noticing all these things which are like there's a professor at ICP, the International Center for Photography in New York, who says that what you leave out of the frame is as important as what you frame, right? So that then starts also building your picture for you. So that's very important. You're absolutely right. There's that situational awareness that you need of what's going on all around. And I think cats do this really well. They'll be staring, but their ears and everything, they know exactly what's happening. They might be intently focused on something, but they know what's happening. So be a cat.
I'm super scared of cats.
Are you serious?
No, in the sense, I'm a little wary of them. So I had this is a complete digression and nothing to do with either you or me, but I had this playful theory once that we want to present ourselves as dogs, or we want to be like dogs, but we're actually cats. And the sense is that dogs are cute and cuddly and friendly, and they'll do everything unconditionally, and there is no instrumentality in their behavior, while cats are fucking sociopaths. Right? So they want to cuddle, they'll come to you. You want to cuddle, it doesn't matter, fuck off.
We
right?
don't have a hope in hell being as accomplished as cats. Because those guys, I think, in terms of athleticism, in terms of just sheer awareness and senses, they're on all the time.
I
they're
think
amazing.
we are incompetent cats. We have the sociopathy of cats without the abilities. But here's a question I want to ask you. In the context of that great metaphor of the gorilla in the basketball game, do you remember any gorillas that you've seen? Any memorable gorillas when you're switched off and you notice something that you may not otherwise have spotted?
Oh, like that? Mm-hmm. Yes. It's from the tram only. So the first time I was in Calcutta, December 2011, I was enamored by the place. I think I'm half Bengali somewhere in me. I think I was a Bengali. I've always felt like very...
That
very
makes it
drawn.
one Bengali in the room because I'm an actual half Bengali. So
You're Bengali?
My mom is Bengali. Yeah.
Okay. So then somewhere. But so I was just like thrilled to be in Calcutta, and I was on the trams and I was doing this. I was going up and down, but I was with my camera and shooting obsessively everybody, everything. Every time that those trams are so dilapidated and scratched, that's just like a photographer's delight, right? It's like a very distressed look and this, that. I was just shooting, going up and down, Rabindra Sharani. Going that time the tram would actually go there. Now it doesn't. Doing all of that. Then the last trip I was doing, I had thought I'd shot enough, and I think maybe I was kind of done. Maybe battery was low or something. Camera was sitting next to me. I'm going on the same thing, okay, the exact same route. Suddenly, I see this guy, old man, sitting on a ledge this high, red color ledge this high, with about 3 feet high. I'm showing about 3 feet, and his legs dangling over the ledge, and underneath that it says House of Tagore. And I was like, wait, what? And then I look up, and there's this huge arch, which I've missed completely. And it says Joroshanko. And I'm like, what? Because for me, I've always been a huge fan of Tagore, right from when I was little. I used to always read all his books and stuff like that. And I've always wanted to visit Joroshanko, and I always thought it was outside Calcutta. So I thought that this, my first trip of Calcutta, I'm not going to be able to see it. I'll come again and all that. And here I am. And I'm like, I've passed this like 6 times and I've not seen this. And so, of course, I got down and went there, which is another story completely. But that was one. I'd not seen this massive archway which said Joroshanko, no matter how many times I'd gone up and down, because I was looking at this level, I was not looking up and seeing the whole thing.
So I asked you if you've seen a gorilla and you said Joroshanko. What would Robidas say? What would Robidas say?
That's why I didn't understand your question. I was like, wait, that way.
Yeah.
Something.
What, have you seen real gorillas also?
No, I haven't yet. Not yet, but I want to. Seen orangutans, but not gorillas.
On that note, let's take a quick commercial break, and on the other side, we shall continue. Have you always wanted to be a writer but never quite gotten down to it? Well, I'd love to help you. Since April 2020, I've enjoyed teaching 27 cohorts of my online course, The Art of Clear Writing, and an online community has now sprung up of all my past students. We have workshops, a newsletter to showcase the work of students, and vibrant community interaction. In the course itself, through 4 webinars spread over 4 weekends, I share all I know about the craft and practice of clear writing. There are many exercises, much interaction, and a lovely and lively community at the end of it. The course costs rupees 10,000 plus GST, or about $150. If you're interested, head on over to register at indiauncut.com/clearwriting. That's indiauncut.com/clearwriting. Being a good writer doesn't require God-given talent, just a willingness to work hard and a clear idea of what you need to do to refine your skills. I can help you. Welcome back to The Seen and the Unseen. I'm still with Arati Kumar-Rao. You would have noticed we've spoken well past the 1 hour she initially expected. So I want to, follow up. I want to go back to your biographical track and talk about that period where first you take that pause from your career and then you kind of leave and you're doing all of this other stuff and you're fumbling and you're fighting your way around. How is it that then, take me through that part of the journey where you eventually shift to doing the kind of long form stories that you've done, whether it's reporting from Rajasthan or the River Diaries and so on. How did that journey really begin?
The long form journey, right?
Yeah.
Very interesting. It actually was not gradual. It was a moment in time. And I'll tell you how. So I was in Sri Lanka, 2011, 2012. Every year I would go back, sometimes a couple of times a year, to watch elephants and shoot as well as write about them, make notes about elephant behavior and so on. In 2012, in November, Prem and I were going to Bepur in Calicut to look at the Uru building, the house, the big boats that they build there. And we were coming back. And on the way back, we were in a car and we went past a man walking in a dhoti, and he had a crutch of some sort. And we were just way too fast. It was a highway. We just zipped past him. And maybe about 5 minutes after zipping past him, I turned to Prem and I said, I don't want to do stories like this. Where we're going to a place and then coming back and, it's just been a few days and then we're just zipping past and so on. I wanted to talk to that man, So it was just a random thought in my head. It was not a particularly insightful thought or anything, but I just said, this is not how I want to do stories. I want to do stories at the human pace of life. We come back and Prem, in his typical way, he plies me with reading. Like almost every other day I would get links or something to read, which is just the most amazing education I ever got. And so one of those links that he said, you were talking about the human pace of life. Here's a guy who's planning to walk around the world at the human pace of life. And he sent me this link of Paul Salopek. And I realized that there are people who are doing this kind of stuff, or rather who want to do this kind of stuff. And that my premise was valid and that I was not out there. And then, so time passed. It was, I think, February 2013 or so when I met Vishwanath, and then came back and told Prem that, I want to do long form, slow. I didn't know these words at that time. I didn't know long form and all that. I was a complete newbie, right? So I would just say, I want to do slow storytelling, which will be centered around fresh water, because that was my thing. I was also remembering Papa and his railing against dams and stuff like that. And I knew that Arunachal Pradesh was going to be riddled with dams and so on. And so I knew I wanted to explore that too. And then Vishwanath had told me to go to the desert and start from there with their rainwater harvesting, which is an ancient tradition and so on. So I told Prem that I just want to do deep storytelling about fresh water, different things around fresh water. And the first thing I'm going to be doing is going to the desert. So I think that's where it began. And of course, when I went there, Chattar Singh took his own time. And then I said, when we started talking the very first day, within 5 minutes, he asked me, how much time do you have? And I had booked a one-way ticket, thank goodness, and told him that. He was most happy. And that then led me to just staying in the desert for the 1.5 years or so. Not staying, but I kept coming back, but also going back because I had a little daughter. So I couldn't go and just live there much as I would like to. And so that, but then as I was doing that also, I was keeping up with stuff that was going on in Arunachal Pradesh and the dams and so on. Were never far away from my mind. And so I knew that the Ganga-Brahmaputra basin also was something that I wanted to spend time in. So those were the two things that that's what River Diaries, that was River Diaries to start with, but that's what Margin Lands basically is.
And I was thinking about the story of yours with Chattar Singh, that he asked you how long you have and you said, I've taken a one-way ticket. And even before that, in a sense, when you quit for good, you took a one-way ticket. How important is it to take one-way tickets?
I think it's very important. I mean, in my mind, I never know what I will find when I get to a place, whether metaphorically or literally. And so for me, that first step of just leaving to go somewhere or to get someplace or just leaving home is the most important thing. And the rest is up in the air. I've never thought about it. I never buy round trip tickets. Unless it's a very defined thing, where, I don't know, if I'm taking people on an expedition or something, like a snow leopard expedition where that you're going from point A to point B and finishing it up and coming back. But for my work, it's always a one-way ticket.
Yeah, and I ask that in a broader metaphorical sense because I think that there is a profound shift that when you take a one-way ticket, you made the commitment, you can just plunge in and you can do it, and there's no hurry also. And when you speak of, doing slow stories, it's like, to me, the thought sounds incredibly attractive. I keep using the word Therav. I want to find Therav in my life, right? Incredibly attractive, but difficult to find it if you go looking for it, because then you're looking for it and by definition, then it's not there.
Not there, right.
So was there a phase like that where you are still kind of stuck in the old way of thinking, where you're thinking about milestones and what have I done today and what am I going to do tomorrow? Like when you mentioned that you would work for 2 days and take 2 days off, is that something you arrived at? Because initially I imagine it may well have been difficult for you to give yourself the permission to take those 2 days off. So what was that process like of finding the right rhythm for what you want to do?
I spent 10 years at Intel, which is a US corporate company with a very strong corporate culture, a great place to work, frankly, and their commitment to deliverables is very high. And if you're working there for 10 years, it's ingrained in you so deeply, that almost you write something called weeklies, which is at the end of the week, you write, or whatever, Monday morning, 11 o'clock, it's due. You write what has happened the previous week, everything that you've done, all your accomplishments. And that happens week after week after week. And then you write a monthly. And then you write an annual. Okay, so you're doing all of this. So you have to keep producing. You can't say, what are you going to put in it if you don't do anything, right? So this stuff gets ingrained in you so deeply. And I must say though, Intel took really good care of me. But it was so ingrained in me that I had to deliver something every day, that when I quit, to sit without doing anything, even if it was just research or something, right? So nothing to show for it, right? You haven't actually written or published or something. Oh my God, it used to drive me up the wall. It took me a long time to get over that deliverable mindset. And the thing that helped me was going back to Wendellberry and going back to the land. Because a land that is constantly asked to produce will lose its capability to yield very fast, and also then become much worse than it was to start with. And so it's that concept of land lying fallow for periods of time, and then again it regains its stuff, like Jhum agriculture and so on, the old ways of doing things. That helped me. And I said, look, if that's the way it is in nature, that things lie fallow to regenerate, it has to be right, because nature doesn't do anything wrong. And I'm not saying that to romanticize anything. It's just the way science is, right? That's what it is. It's
natural selection.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's just biology. So I said, okay, give yourself the permission to sit. I mean, don't sit and purposely do nothing, like don't waste your time or whatever, like, doing random stuff, like looking at your phone or something. But if you're not actively producing something, if you are just mulling things, if you are trying to make connections, but you're not really doing, the doing of not doing, right? The action without action kind of thing, the Chinese concept of wei wu wei, that it kind of appealed a lot to me. And I said, okay, I'm going to give myself the permission to not do if I don't, if I feel like I need the time. And so that also played into this whole slow process of storytelling, and the permission to give myself days off, even though I'm in field. When you're in field, you are staying in some hotel or something. I mean, you are bleeding, right? You're bleeding money. So it's not easy to give that permission to yourself either. But I realized that what came out after that period of lying fallow was so much better than if I were not to lie fallow and I was to just keep going. So yeah, that it took some unlearning and some reconditioning of my mind. But now I find there are so many well-written, well-documented people, amazing stuff in literature which says this, that everything that happens to you is fodder. So even when you're lying fallow, there is something that's happening to you, and it is fodder. There is something that you can use to do going forward. So it's not a waste, quote unquote waste.
One of the powerful aspects of your book for me was how you spoke about, taking the time to immerse yourself in stories, and especially about how in so many stories, the interactions are transactional, that you want something out of a subject, quote unquote, and you ask them the questions and they give you the answers, and you take whatever part of it suits in a narrative, etc., etc. And you spoke at length about here exactly what you just said. Immersion is necessary. And there's also a point there about nature and time itself. Like at one point, and I'll quote here, you write, Rainer Maria Rilke likens the life of an artist to that of a tree, and his words are true of storytelling about landscapes too. In this, and these are his words, in this there is no measuring with time. A year doesn't matter and 10 years are nothing. His words end, now you continue. That need to absorb myself in landscapes deepened further with time and was reaffirmed when I came across a wise professor's urgings. Environmental stories, Rob Nixon writes in Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor, are about quote-unquote slow violence, and now these are his words, a kind of destruction that unleashes itself incrementally over seasons, often over generations. Unspectacular and sometimes imperceptible, it can be spatially dispersed. A disruption in one place can affect landscapes and lives several hundreds of miles away. Those who live in these landscapes and the ecosystems themselves die by 1,000 cuts. Stop quote. And your book has many examples of this, and I'll discuss some of the specific ones later. But my broad question here is that how did that moment come where at one level you're taking it slow, you're immersing yourself, you're understanding a little deeper, but over a period of time your attention must be shifting from seeing the shorter term stories and the impressions of the present moment to seeing the bigger picture, to traveling not just within the place you are, but traveling back in time in that place, understanding the linkages, seeing that bigger story. What is it for you? Because one, I imagine that one way it can happen is in a very glacial, slow way where gradually it takes years and things kind of simmer down. And there can also be these drastic moments where you suddenly see something and you're like, wow, fuck, I didn't know what that was like. And in a sense, when I think of the 7 years I've been doing this podcast, I kind of think of, now I've begun to think of all the long conversations I've had in the last 3 or 4 years as not being separate conversations, but part of a greater journey of curiosity and part of this larger conversation that it's sort of part of. And I'm thinking when I read your book that, okay, the different sections might be about different places and different people, but in a sense, it's the same long continuing story about your engagement with what you stand on, which makes you stand for it. So tell me a little bit about that, those frames of reference shifting, and what does that then do to you when you can, because I think that must also bring with it a great sense of how unimportant one is in that larger span of time, in the larger scheme of things where everything is happening. So I'm sounding a bit incoherent, but I'm very curious to know about how you made this journey of being able to slip back into that slower rhythm where you're seeing these deeper stories play out, and then every deeper story informs every other story that you do.
I think I realized that was the nature of things. And the very fact that, like, for example, in the Brahmaputra, the very fact that I was in one village in Assam, and what was happening in that village was because what was happening in Arunachal, high up. And what was happening in that village then affected what was happening further down in lower Assam. It cued me very quickly into the fact that all of these things are connected. The basin is one humongous living, breathing creature. We may not see it that way immediately, but it really is like that, because what's coming from the Himalayas is what is depositing in the Sundarbans in Bangladesh, right? And so you stop that, things will change here, right? And we are stopping that, and we are making these changes to the land without looking at it as a whole. And I realized that seeing that creature in its entirety is so important to be able to take decisions of what to do in those lands, right? In those landscapes. And it was really, and I think I bring up that story in the chapter on the desert, but it's equally applicable to the rest of India too, about the blind man and the elephant, right? So when you look at things piecemeal, you see only one part of it. You don't really see how it connects and why that piece is important. And that piece is important. Every piece is important, because when you change that piece, it changes a whole bunch of things around you and around it. And those changes then will be very difficult to walk back, because it's all cascading effects. And it may not happen immediately also. Those changes are also temporarily displaced. So that was very quick. And in fact, I think it's luck. I was lucky to visit Farraka very early on in my journey here, because that threw so many things into place, I had already seen what the Teesta was doing, which was a year before that. And then I saw what the Teesta Barrage, that is. And then I saw what Farraka Barrage was doing. And these are just examples, of which there are many, like you said in the book. But very telling examples of how both temporally and spatially things can be dispersed, and how what happens in one place can just change and destroy things that happen even 1,200 kilometers away. So seeing things and again, I go back to what my dad used to say when I was young. At that time, I used to be like, okay, yeah, dad's going to give me another lecture kind of thing. But he was saying those things, he was talking about how things connect up, how ecologically expensive, for example, a dam is, and how thoughtless, and why you have to think more about, and it's not just the displacement of the people immediately in and around the region. Ecologically, it's very, very, very destructive, and in the long run also. And so, to be able to think through those things, and then I think it just started connecting up, and I started seeing things. I started meeting people also who could see that these things were happening. Like there is a person called Kalyan Rudra. I mention him in the book as well. Excellent conversations I had with him. So important to be able to see the bigger picture. And these people helped me see that. And then once you see it, there's no unseeing. Then wherever you go, no matter where you go, you take that 30,000 foot view and then you start connecting things up. So it just takes one or maybe two times of that learning. And then you know that, oh my God, these are... So then you start asking those questions. Okay, this is happening here. What's happening upstream? What's happening up the coast, right? Or whatever. So then when you ask those questions and you hear those answers, you say, well, duh, this is going to happen because somebody's not seeing the big picture. So it's really important to see those things. So while I keep harping about local geography, the reason I do that is because that local geography connects up to other places too. And you need to know what is right and how that system behaves before tinkering with any one place.
There's a place called Sadgaon, which Ibn Battuta once called a big place on the Great Sea.
Yes.
And you've written in your book about the importance of Sadgaon in the 13th century when it was so central to this region. And I had never heard of Sadgaon till I read you write about it, right? And I'm sure most of my listeners haven't either. And that kind of brought me to thinking about how, and it's just a few centuries ago, and it brought me to thinking about how fast things change, that we live in the present moment, and we almost have this illusion about the permanence of this moment and the permanence of how things are, and everything is going to be wiped out. Everything is going. Its time is moving so incredibly fast. Nothing will stay the same. The lines on the map which we take for granted honestly cannot possibly stay the same over time. It just doesn't make sense. And I wonder that as you get deeper into these, when you see, these long narratives that have played out over centuries in all these places that you have been to, what does it do to your relationship with time as you also are growing older? So I think about that because, when you are young, when you're 20, it seems like time stretches out forever. And, someone who is 40 is middle-aged and someone who's 50 is old and all of that. And then when you actually hit 40 and then when you actually hit 50, you're like, wait a minute, where did the years go? It went by so fast. And then you look back and 50 years in history, which seemed like such a long time when you were a kid, is nothing. A couple of centuries is really nothing. All of this is really nothing. Everything kind of compresses. So how has that changed you and the way you look at the world?
Yeah, you're very right. And in fact, especially in that region, right? Satgaon, Bengal, with the moving rivers. I write about Gaur, which is a expanded essay in the paperback, which has just come out. And the fall of Gaur because the river moved. And of course, it's easy to say that. It doesn't happen immediately. It happens over time. But looking back, there are all these different, changes that have happened, which are unthinkable right now, right? If you think about it. And it's just that is also partly why, let me put it this way. What might endure, what might endure, what might the world look like in the future and beyond our lifetimes will probably depend upon what we do in this day and age, right? And then what successive people do as well. Even if you just look at, for example, and I'm going to jump around here a bit because my thought process is just jumping around. Even if you look at, for example, invasive species, right? If we did nothing and invasive species, which is their nature to take over places, take over and crowd out the native species, which are very specific and very different and very varied and very diverse, all of that goes and you're just going to have a mass of one particular invasive species or three particular invasive species. That's what the world will look like later on. And it may not be as productive as it is today. And those people will have to deal with it. Whereas if we did something right today, the world might look very different, right? If we restore landscapes today, if we did right by the land, like I keep harping about today, then even down, and then every successive generation does that too, then the world's going to look different. So I think while time compresses and expands in our memory in certain ways, I think our actions will determine what that time looks like for a particular time, space or landscape. And so I feel that the here and now is very important. And while it might seem larger in importance than maybe in the long run, it really is important because what we do does determine what happens, right? And so destroying something now or not paying attention to something now will have repercussions. And then subsequently and subsequently and subsequently. Whether we care about it or not is a different thing completely, and I'm not talking to that. But the point is that what is time, right? Why is one part of Arunachal Pradesh, which is on the China border, why does it look today like it looked 100 years ago, right? It hasn't changed at all. That's because probably people did things people do things to that area, and people are there everywhere. People do things to that area which has kept it that way. In the very next valley, people have behaved differently, and maybe all the tigers are gone, or all the whatever, something has happened, and the river has changed course or something like that, and it looks different. So I think what happens in certain time periods determines the rest. And so when you look at it, over time, and you say, oh yeah, the river moved, this city fell, that city rose in importance, and so on. It might be small changes or small things that happened at that time. Maybe a small dike somebody made or some diversion somewhere. Something happened which changed the course of history. So it's really our actions that change that. So I'm very cognizant of the fact that these actions matter. Small actions matter. It might seem small actually, but it's not really small. But these decisions we take and these things that we do matter. And it helps us to keep that in mind, because what do we want to leave? If we don't care about it and we say, okay, hey, what the hell, let it be all, let everything look the same, and let's do it with all trees, and then be what it may, let it become hot and whatever else happens, and let the climate change happen. And those guys, that's just the natural course of life. A lot of people say that. So that's just the way it is. Every generation has its legacy, and this is our legacy, and that's fine. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is to do right, and so that when history looks back, when this period becomes history, rather, there is, something to be said about what we did. I don't know if that answered your question. I was rambling all over the place.
No, it was a great question. And my question, in a sense, was also about your personal sense of time. But I think, in a way, you've given me an answer. If I might just double click on it, is it then the case that your sense of how tiny actions by us can have a part dependence that can have massive consequences in the future, does your understanding of that then give all your work this sense of purpose?
That's too much for me.
No, I know you. The moment I formulated the question in my head, I knew you'd recoil from it because it sounds grandiose and self-important. Yeah. But I think at some point one can own it. Like, I do this podcast with a sense of purpose. I think it's bigger than me, and there's no harm in saying that. It might be vanity, but it is what it is. Mm-hmm. So, and in your writing, like in a lot of your writing, fine, early on, there were people who were paying you to write, but a lot of the time there were people who were not paying you to write. Mm-hmm. Like you said, you've taken personal loans so that you can fund your travel and you can do all of this, and you have paid a price. It is a labor of love. You could have been somewhere else. You left the corporate world to do this, and you continued doing this, and you went deeper into this when it was clear that it was no money. So I just want to know what drives you. None of us is going to save the world. If anything, we are going to make such tiny differences that it doesn't matter. But what drives you nevertheless?
So maybe just the fact that, writing, recording, witnessing, putting it down somewhere where maybe somebody will use it to do the right thing, like to just think the right way, maybe, is what drives me. Increasingly, though, Amit, I must say that I'm not that ambitious even. I feel that it comes down to very, what should I say? It comes down to things that aren't in our hands. It was just weird to say that, but I'm just saying that like, if we go back to that earlier question you asked me, right? Is anybody listening? Is anybody reading? I'm doing this, yes. I'm doing it with like the epigraph says in my book, that it's not that individual stories matter. It's just that maybe better policies will be crafted if individual stories are known, right? So maybe someone sitting in like a COP28 or a COP29 or 30 or however long it takes to solve this, sits and understands how a river basin behaves and all the complexities, not just the fact that you need to get to zero emissions, but all the complexities that play into that. If somebody puts that then on the table saying, hey, we also need to look at X, Y, and Z, and not just zero emissions and not just blinkered vision of, going towards a certain way. And then there's a conversation that goes on over there. Maybe that's somewhere. So I'm not thinking that, and it's not just my work. It's let there be a groundswell of this kind of thinking. Let there be a lot of people, even students, writing about such things, being able to see things the right way. And right way, I'm just saying right way in the sense that do right by the land way, right? To see the land ethic, the water ethic. And if there's a groundswell of such things and all of that starts getting written about, and say your Times of India, front pages and there is just this kind of a movement of doing correct by the land and not just the shiny badge of GDP, then maybe something will shift, something will change, something will move. So it's not just me, but I'm just one part of hopefully a movement, because there are so many people who have been saying this. I'm not the first. Hopefully I'm not the last. And there are so many people who have been saying this before us, and in so many different ways, that maybe at some point somebody will listen. Maybe it may be too late. Maybe it might be, you've destroyed all this and then you have to build back from scratch, which is always harder, instead of, saving or protecting or conserving what is already there. Maybe we'll get to that point of no return and then try and come back. Don't know. But I'm just hoping to be part of a kind of way of thinking which stands every creature, human and non, in good stead.
I think, the question of whether, all right, Artie is making faces now saying, have I said too much? Have I sounded, why you are like this? No, why women are like this? Of course it's not grandiose. Own it. No, and like I think the question, will someone read me? Will someone listen to this? I think the question is wrong. But it's partly wrong because you can't control who will listen or who won't. And also, this point in time doesn't matter. Whether they read your book now or not doesn't matter. 30 years later, some young girl could read the book and get inspired, and that makes a difference. This travels across time. And, so maybe, you can think of outcomes in terms of, will policy change? You could think of outcomes in subtler terms of, will other writers get inspired? Will they feel they have the permission to do this kind of long form? But I would actually say that in a sense the outcomes are irrelevant. It is it is a dharma to do what we do, and therefore
You're
we do it.
absolutely right, and that's my thing. I'm just doing it because that's what I do, and that's my joy. I have joy in doing this kind of work, even though a lot of it is bad news. But the outcomes be what they may be. And you're absolutely right. Sometimes it's just some people who write into me, who have read the book or who have just started reading the book, they write into me with things, saying things like, I will never go to a place and see this a certain way again, That in itself is a change for me, and I think that is great. I'm so happy that kind of awareness or that kind of observation will change, and then that person will probably have progeny who will look at things a different way, and so on and so forth, right? It just goes on down the road. So yeah, outcomes just don't matter. But when people write such things back, it just feels like this thing which has acquired its life of its own, which is what it has. And it's out of my realm now. It's got a life of its own and it's doing its thing. And if it didn't do anything, or if these people didn't write into me and I didn't know anything, so what?
So I've done practically no talking on this show ever about the environment and so on, but I have done lots and lots and lots of talking about the state. And everything that you wrote about the state in this book was so incredibly familiar to me. And I'm going to read out that bit about the blind man and the elephant because I think it's such a beautiful statement where you write, I think of the fable of the six blind men and the elephant and I reimagine it for our times. One touches the limestone and thinks, ah, a resource to be mined. Another feels a wind that sweeps the desert into dunes and says, oh yes, carbon brownie points for the taking. A third feels the dryness of the sand and envisions a world of intricate canals and flourishing agriculture. And a fourth dreams of large stretches of acacia on the towering dunes. Each touches an element of the desert at some opportunistic point and fashions his worldview accordingly. None bothers to fathom the desert in its intricate entirety, and therefore none appreciates how an intervention here could ruin an integral dynamic elsewhere. Stop quote. And there are so many examples of this. You speak about the de-desertification of that part of Rajasthan where you went to, where the consequence of clumsy government action leads to mosquitoes everywhere where they were unknown in that area. You have malaria, you have dengue. The grasslands are cleared supposedly for agriculture, but what it means is that all the vegetation that millions of goats and sheep would eat is lost, and this affects the ecosystems of goats and sheep, and the regeneration of that is also lost, and everything basically goes to hell. You've got detailed sections on the Farraka Barrage. You talk about the seawalls and groins of Kerala, and everywhere it is what Hayek would have called the fatal conceit, where a government has a little bit of information, the blind man thinks he knows the trunk of the elephant and therefore the elephant itself, and then you do these top-down policies and everything absolutely goes to hell. And I was just thinking, and I wonder what you think of this, that the solution isn't so much that you will get the state rid of its fatal conceit. I think that's never going to happen because humans are flawed, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And we will take the lazy shortcuts. I think the solutions are structural, where number one, you need government to be as local as possible. Because the less centralized it is, the more this kind of nonsense will happen. If the people living on a land are the one administering it, they are less likely to do stupid things. And the other one would be that even there, the principle should be that the government, as far as possible, should not act. Like on one level, we can say that, hey, the government should do X, Y, Z for the environment. But I think 90% of good would come if the government just did not do things that it has done, like the Farraka Barrage and all of that, which have such enormous consequences that play out over decades. So how do you think of the role of the state? Because it seems to me that to get the state to change its behavior when it's sitting in Delhi and making policy that will affect Arunachal is next to impossible and never really works. It's a wider battle to change the system where you empower local people everywhere. And, this kind of clumsy top-down thinking doesn't happen.
Yeah, completely. I mean, that what you've said is exactly where my mind is at as well, except that it's not a question of Delhi, it's a question of mindset. And the people sitting in Delhi are removed geographically, yes, from certain places, but it doesn't mean that they'll do right by Delhi either. It's a mindset. And same way, a person who might be a chief minister, say, of Arunachal, need not necessarily do right by Arunachal either. It's again a mindset. So it's really more of a colonial mindset, or a mindset of taming the land and making it pliable, making it do at your bidding and so on, rather than listening to the land. But if you listen to people who live with the land, they have a very different take on things. They'll say, ye yahan pe nahi ugega. They'll tell you. They'll say, ye yahan pe nahi ugega. Isko na ye chahiye, wo chahiye. Isko dhoop chahiye, isko pani chahiye. Right? All those kinds of things. They know what happens, what doesn't happen. In fact, in the desert, they know that beyond a certain point, the soil changes. You will not be able to do what you can do east of that place, west of that place, So there's a border, there's a last place where you can actually farm, beyond which you can't farm. The government has gone and put the canals exactly beyond that place where you can't farm, and they're trying to. So you'll see swathes of just sand being watered, and a lot of fertilizers, agriculture, etc., etc. So the thing is that if you are going to impose, and this can come even from a person who is not connected to the land, but is off the land, So it's really a mindset. If your mindset is to impose what you think you know or what has worked elsewhere. See, that's the other thing, right? We have constantly, colonial, of course, the British brought all kinds of things to India and have created a huge mess with, embankments or whatever else, everything. And so, inappropriate stuff in the sense that even what works in Maharashtra will not necessarily work in Ladakh. What works in Punjab doesn't work in Ladakh. Or even using a public distribution system where you're flooding Ladakh's markets with Punjab rice, it's not necessarily the right thing.
The term biologists have for it is isomorphic mimicry. You take a policy from here and you think it will work there, and like fat chance.
Exactly. And the land is laughing. And it's like, dude, this is not going to work here. I would have told you. Like, even Farraka, and I mention it, right? You put a dam, but then you don't consider that this land is a tidal delta. So, of course, the damn thing is going to come right back, right? So it's just a question of, yes, absolutely going local, seeing what I think. So I don't have the answers. If I had the answers, I think I'd been making money actually, but not happening. So I don't have the answers, but I think the way to think about it would probably be to, yes, devolve to the people who live closest to the land or at least listen to them, right? And see what each community needs. And so again, I'm getting into solution space here, which is just, I know that things are far more complicated than that. And so it's not that, but it's just that we can't do a one size fits all. And let's just, even if we were to just come to that conclusion and make that resolution that we will not do one size fits all, that we will not go and put a high dam in a seismic zone. Who does that, right? But we're doing it all the time. So, it's just, let's not do stupid things. Yeah, that'll be even our first step. I'm sorry. Even just that would be a first step.
Yeah. That's why I said I'd like the state to have a bias for inaction.
Yes.
Just not doing things would solve 90% of the problems. For a moment, let's move away from the unpleasant subject of the state and talk about society and culture, where, if we go back to that earlier statement of Chattar Singh that, oh, my son will not get these languages and he's, the tyranny of the 31st or whatever phrase he used. And I'm thinking that there is a genuine dilemma there. Like, it is easy for us to look at the state and say that, okay, this kind of blunt top-down thinking is nonsensical. There is no nuance here. It is just bad. It's a wrong way of thinking. But when I think of the clash between modernity and a traditional way of life, I think the question becomes much more complicated, because it is natural for the young to want prosperity, to want to go to a city where there are so many more opportunities, especially in these times where the whole world has opened up. So that attraction towards modernity is something that I understand and even support. But at the same time, there is that lament of Chattar Singh that we are losing all of this, and we are losing the language, and more importantly, we are losing the understanding of the land that we are living on. And in my mind, I can't find an easy way to resolve this particular tension, because I can't find it within me to decide from top-down Bombay that, no, Chattar Singh's son, I would like him to stay with Chattar Singh and learn the land. Of course not. He's got to do whatever he's got to do. He should have the same ambitions as you and I do. So how do you sort of see this playing out at a social level, that, the choices of these rational individuals to do what's right for them can have a kind of impact where an entire way of life and entire multitudes of languages and other cultural facets like foods and all that just kind of vanish? So what is your sense of,
Yeah, it's tricky. And I think prescription is never a good thing, of course. So the other, to spin this on its head though, imagine now if Chattar Singh's kid, and I heard this exact same lament from the Nishi elders in Arunachal, by the way, that our kids are learning rubbish, because they come back and they don't know anything about their land, right? One is not. So let's turn this on its head and say, how about if our education system would at least equip the child to live in its milieu and know how to work the land productively? So it's not pumping urea and fertilizers and stuff. I mean, there's a whole, I think we've just gone so far away from what is correct for different parts of the land, right? Like growing rice in Punjab, or, I mean, everything has just gone so so far away from what is ideal or what was, that even just saying something like that sounds radical. But how about if the Nishi child could go back home from school and know not to touch that plant which is going to give it rash, or know that that river at that point is going to have that fish which is going to feed this family, right? Or you should not touch the fish because it's gravid, whatever, different things, right? So how about even just that, where yes, make it worth their while to not be forced to migrate, because let's face it, our cities as they stand today are not equipped for this kind of migration, right? If everybody were to migrate, 400 million people migrating to our cities, imagine, look at our cities even today, right? And look at the people who come to live here. So now I'm on a National Geographic grant to document what happens to these people, right? So margin lands was about the landscapes and so on. And now these people are forced to move, many of them forced. What happens then, right? So that's my next project now. So that's what I'm investigating. I'm going to start investigating. It's been pushed because of COVID and various other reasons, book and all that. But it's going to start now in earnest. And if you ask them, they are living hand to mouth in the city. They do not have children. If they've come with them, they don't have adequate or good education. There's no healthcare. The way they live on roads. Even just now, just outside on Church Street, I saw somebody in a ghagra, which clearly tells me they're not from local Karnataka, living on the street with a child. And that's it. This is just right here on Church Street, right? So what kind of life are we giving even these migrants? We're saying, it's their right to dream and let them come to the city for a job. But what kind of job? So when I went to Bihar, for example, in Kahalgaon, Eastern Bihar, just across the border from West Bengal, that's what the fishermen threw in my face. Fishers, actually, the women threw in our face. They said, you told us, send the kid to school. We have, made heaven and earth one to send them to college. The child is first class first, but doesn't have a job. Now what? Now you look at all of them, they're sitting with their mobile phones on chalk huts and doing nothing. And they don't know how to fish. There are also no fish in the river, right? So where are we leaving these people? This is the demographic dividend of India. Where are we leaving this next generation? And some of these districts have the highest population of young children, right? Under the age of 6 and so on. This Jharkhand, West Bengal, North West Bengal and Bihar, this whole area. And that's just one example. What are we... Okay, so if we are saying, yes, they have the right to dream, are we then setting it up such that they are able to take that further? Or are we saying, yes, you have the right to dream, but then that's it? So it's neither here nor there. So then maybe it makes sense to at least teach them that generational livelihood, which, and I'm sure there'll be economists who will completely diss this and say this is not the way, economics is different and so on. But
there's a caricature of economists. I don't think economists would say that.
I hope so. And I know I'm hearing some new ones now who are saying things which are actually ecologically sound as well. I feel that it's so funny that economy is shorn of ecology when ecology actually supports economy. So they should be far more aligned than they are.
I agree, and I think it's a false dichotomy. I think you can grow GDP and look after the environment at the same time.
You just have to do the right things in the right places. You can't put yahan pe jo ho raha hai, wahan pe kar do, or everything is okay.
The Farraka Barrage hasn't done anything for our economy, right? With all the destruction it's caused, all of these things are backfiring in an economic sense also.
I mean, look at what's happening in Uttarakhand. Look at what's happening in Joshimath. I mean, do it right. Nobody's against development, but what is development, right? There has to be a fundamental reshift. That's why I keep coming back to mindset. It's a mindset that needs changing. It's not, and then the tactics will change automatically. But anyway, yeah. So I think, if somehow we give these people a reason to stay back, and I know of people like, for example, Sonam Wangchuk in Ladakh is trying to make it worth the youth in Ladakh for them to stay back in their villages, have homestays, resurrect their dry land agriculture, which has been destroyed by the PDS of Punjab rice and so on. and let them thrive. Yeah, let them thrive there. Otherwise, you're going to lose. All the pashmina is going to be gone because there's so many things happening, right? It's all connected. So the question is not, the answers are not easy. Nobody said it was. But we have amazing minds to put, if we just start thinking in the right directions, And the problem, though, is that everybody wants quick fixes. And that quickness, that fastness, that speed is never conducive to thought or to thoughtfulness. And so then, you'll end up with everything that's already going on here.
I agree with absolutely everything you said. I'll add to the lament and kind of deepen those themes a little bit. I have a very close friend of mine, Mohit Satyanand, who has a hill home in Satauli in Himachal. So he's been going there for some 30-40 years. So he's seen generations, and he often talks about how, when he was young, the people who were locals, maybe the gardener, maybe the plumber, etc., they send their kids to school, right? And what has happened now is that the kids have done school, they've done college, they've got their BA degree and perhaps even more, but they're not getting jobs because there are no jobs out there. And one, they don't have the local kind of knowledge that their parents do. And two, they think those jobs are beneath them. They're like, I'm not going to till the land. I have a degree, right? So what we've done there is exactly that phrase you use, neither here nor there, that you have purportedly given them an education, but frankly it is a farce. One should not call it an education, which is not, and despite the fact that we have a jobs crisis, there is still a supply-demand mismatch because a lot of the people are not capable of doing anything. Our education system has completely failed them. And part of it is, of course, that whole homogenizing approach that kids of the same age will study together and learn the same damn things, and, which is decided in the early 19th century, etc., and that's nonsensical. And the other thing, again, is that I am a huge fan of urbanization. I think cities are incredible. People should come. But like you said, look at the state of our cities. And part of the reason for the state of our cities is really short-sighted thinking. For example, one of my favorite phrases I've learned from doing the show is from Alex Tabarrok, where he said that in Mumbai, stop reclaiming the land or the sea, reclaim the sky. You just change the FSI, you have more vertical growth, you have less pressure. And actually building cities the way they should be built would, not only make life in cities cheaper and easier for those who come, but would also reduce the load on the environment massively. And we are just doing everything wrong. Like, what is a mode of public transport I would like to see more and more, besides walking, which is my favorite? But besides that, the great mode of public transport is the elevator. And people don't think of it like that. You travel vertically. If you do that, you don't have to travel horizontally. So a lot of the pressures you put on the environment with, and even some of the bridges and flyovers that are happening all over the place. I got to tell you this. In Andheri West, where I live, there is this thing called the Gokhale Bridge, right? So we are recording this on 28th of Feb. This is true as of today. That a couple of days back, this news came that Gokhale Bridge has basically destroyed our lives. It takes 1 hour to reach the damn highway because everything is gone, right? And it's supposed to connect Andheri West to Andheri East. And along the way, it has to synchronize with another bridge called, I forget what it's called, but whatever. It comes from Juhu to whatever, right? And now they have built the whole damn bridge, and at the end of this process, taking 1.5 years or whatever, they have realized that this bridge is a couple of meters lower than that bridge. They got the alignment wrong. So now the whole freaking thing is a waste. It is all a waste. And I'm like, this project must have had hundreds and thousands of crores of budget. You can get the best civil engineers in the world. What the fuck is happening? So it's misgovernance that has destroyed this. Urbanization is an incredible force for good. It's, the state can do so much if it's designed correctly. Education can achieve so much. But we have fucked up the way we do each of these things. And therefore, you have that image of that false dichotomy that, hey, development and environment. I object. You build the cities right, you'll reduce the stress on the environment. In fact, the only way to have real good growth is to have them together. There's just not a contradiction. And this false dichotomy bugs the hell out of me.
No, you're absolutely right. And density in cities, given the right infrastructure, which is public transport and all of that, you can't build densities and then have cars, which is what
exactly.
Great Bangalore is doing. And then you build more roads and you think that it's going to solve the problem. It's just all backwards. But there are enough and more books written about this. And there are enough and more ways to do it that, that work and that have been proven to work. And I just feel that that's what it again comes down to, Amit, that, the knowledge is there. But is anyone listening? Is anyone thinking? Is anyone reading? Or is anyone wanting to do right? I mean, smart cities, it's not just having Wi-Fi everywhere that makes a city smart or, whatever shit. I don't even understand what it is. But can you make a city water self-sufficient, right? Especially a place like Bangalore, right? It's getting so much rain. And I mean, there are all these solutions already there. We've been through this. I'm not going to repeat. And then Bombay, which floods every year, and you're building more concrete, you're putting more concrete on the outflows. Are the outflows enough? Outflows are still the size of what the Britishers built. Have you upgraded that? I mean, just no-brainers, you'd think, but then is anybody paying attention? So, yeah, if the cities were all they were made out to be, if our education system allowed for people to get good jobs, all of that, then yes, it makes sense. But we are not doing any of that. Plus, we are fucking up the... Oh, am I allowed to say that?
Of course you're allowed to say that. I said that. Yeah. I mean, if you're fucking up, you're fucking up. What other... There's no other language for this.
Plus, you're fucking up the villages, which are now, grossly unproductive for whatever reason, all kinds of different reasons. There's so many. You're destroying our rivers. And then there is climate change. We've not even come to climate change. That is going to sit on top of all of these things that we're already doing here. So, I mean, it's hard then to tell people, that the way to do it is to move to a city. Because they're really then exposed to all kinds of market forces and just daily wage work also is not available these days. Then they're just really suffering, right? I just find it so... I mean, either do one of the two things correctly. You can't let both of those balls drop.
Yeah, I've had many episodes on cities. A recent one with Pritika Hingorani was particularly enlightening for me, especially when one thinks of density. So I'll link that from the show notes. And, just as Manto's great short story, Toba Singh, was such a wonderful allegory for what went wrong, your story of Palash Gachi is just an amazing allegory for modern India and everything that you're describing. And essentially, it is like this sandbar island or temporary island, which is there on the Ganga, which is created by the Ganga. And as you point out, the Ganga is moving all the time. It's not in one place. So eventually, this Palash Gachi becomes what the Jharkhand government claims is now part of Jharkhand. But the people are not. They refuse to accept the people. And so the West Bengal government will not treat the people as their people or give them any benefits because they're like, but these people are in Jharkhand. So these people are like Toba Tek Singh. They're just stranded. Exactly. They're like, where the fuck am I? Am I in Jharkhand? Am I in Bengal? What's going on? So it's just an incredible sort of, since you spoke about are people listening, all the knowledge is out there, etc., etc. Tell me a little bit about the ecosystem of ideas that you have experienced. That have you always felt that you're a voice in the wilderness, or have you felt that there is a growing community of people who want to listen to this stuff? Like every time I come to Bangalore from floody Bombay, you've painted us as floody, but we have the best floods, much better than your floods. So every time I come,
we have the best floods. I'm going to remember this.
It should be a T-shirt.
By the way, I'm a Bombayite through and through. So
I'll make a T-shirt for you also.
Yeah.
we have the best. Yeah. So here's the thing. So when I come from floody Mumbai to Bangalore, one thing that actually delights me is, number one, you have the best bookstores in the world, in Blossoms and Bookworm and all of that. And I think I find whenever I travel, I go to the bookstore of the town I am in because I find that so reflective of the cultural life of the city. And secondly, you have a vibrant cultural life. I had an episode with Sugadha Srinivasaraju where he introduced me to the different local language cultural lives which I may not have been aware of. But even in my limited experience, I remember 6 years back I recorded with Ram Guha, and when I finished he said, let's go to a book launch. Rajmohan Gandhi is launching his book on South India, right? So historian launching book on South India, you imagine, like, if you have that in Bombay, there'll be like 7 people showing up, right? And 5 of them probably work for the venue. Over here, it was like packed. This auditorium was packed, standing room only, and I just absolutely loved it. So my sense from outside is that there is an ecosystem of ideas, that people do care. So tell me a little bit about this. That are you a voice in the wilderness, literally and otherwise, or
It's interesting. So I have grown up with my father being a voice in the wilderness pretty much. He had his friends, a few of them in Bombay, even in the 80s, that he would hang out with, who are pretty much the same people even now who are saying the same things. I mean, they're the same crowd. And so I knew that it was not going to be popular opinion. And even today, while Bangalore, it's very easy to find the tribe, that people who'll agree with you and listen to you and things like that, and they are there in pockets. I happen to live in a community of high net worth individuals, CEOs of unicorns and very well to do and all of that, and one or two only voices like this, So I think whether it's the awareness or whether it's the exposure to such ideas, it depends upon where you are, And so why I always complain that I feel like I don't belong there, and I probably don't belong there also. But then does that mean that I belong only with my tribe? In which case everybody knows. And that's why, when I wrote Margin Lands, I thought 10 people will read it, because I know those 10 people who will.
They'll have to read it.
Yeah. So, so it's interesting. I don't know. I find that a lot of people are very... Again, I don't know whether it's the ignorance or whether it is and ignorance not in a pejorative term. It's just they're just not exposed to these kinds of ideas, or whether it is willful ignorance that that they don't want to listen. But I find a lot of people are happy with status quo. Their life's going well. They don't want to think about this because this is inconvenient, and it needs change, and it may mean giving up certain things, and it's far away. It's not going to affect them because they're cushioned by privilege as well as a whole load of money. What happened last year when the floods flooded these high net worth individuals' homes and took their Bentleys and their Maybachs and their Mercedeses, I think people began to see that environment is not an obstacle or a tick mark that has to be on the way to some project or the other. It's not a nuisance. Maybe it is, but it's not the nuisance that they thought it was. That they have to pay attention to it, that there may be something in what these environmentalists, these tree huggers have been screaming about. I've been called a tree hugger, and I'm continuously called a tree hugger.
Have you ever hugged a tree?
I do. I regularly do.
So they're right. What are you talking about? You should have a T-shirt. I hug the best trees.
Yes, I do actually. We have some lovely trees in the city, and I hug them for sure. But yeah, but it's not. And I think that the othering kind of went off to a small extent and came home to roost last year. But memories are short. Everybody goes back to their daily jobs and what they know best. And it's interesting that now it almost seems like some of these things that sounded outlandish to them or sounded out of left field and out of, oh, she's like, this, whatever, tree hugger types, green. Now people do listen. They do at least listen. Like, they may not actually do anything about it, but they'll at least listen. And I think for better or for worse, given all the things that are happening in Bangalore, and I'm speaking only about Bangalore because I live here, the heat, the crazy rains, the no rains, the floods, the water problems, all of that, people have begun to see the sense in some of these ideas. And I think it's sad that it had to come to that it would be something so... It has to touch them before they can see, and they can't extrapolate. But I'll take it. If people start thinking about these things. Again, I also love the fact that whenever I talk, people who are not people I know do come to listen. They ask great questions. There is a curiosity. And so I'm willing to say that maybe it's just the fact that they're not exposed to things. And that if they were, things would be different. Because people do want to learn, do want to do the right thing. I really hope that. And I hope that then will hold sway going forward as well.
You begin the last section of your book with what is the plot for a beautiful allegorical novel, which I wish you had written. It would have been like Saramago's Blindness, for example. But I love the plot where basically you're creating this thought experiment and saying that imagine if everybody is basically blind and we navigate the world through echolocation or through sound. So sound is really important and hearing is really important. And one day there is a barrage of drones that comes and there is this drone noise, everything. And that affects your ability to navigate the world, because now your echolocation isn't working. That drone is everywhere, and no matter where you go, what you do, that drone is there, and eventually it goes to hell. And you think of it as dystopian. But when you now created this delightful image of floods coming and taking away Bentleys and Maybachs and Mercedeses, I instantly thought that, yeah, floods is equal to drones. That this is sort of, that this makes you see what you were earlier blind to, and is profoundly important. And I actually think that part of the puzzle is in the danger of phrases like tree huggers, right? That people have this simplistic narrative of whether it's environmentalists or feminists or whatever, these simplistic narratives where they've almost turned the words into pejoratives. And the point is, if you look a little deeper, it is in your interest.
Exactly.
It is in the economy's interest if we don't do bullshit like the Farraka Barrage and the de-desertification and all of that. Everything that you have pointed out in your book that hurt the environment also hurt the economy. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Right.
And even these people, right, who are being displaced, they are going to hurt the economy. Because imagine these people are growing up without education first. Secondly, without healthcare. Should we have, God forbid, a public health issue, what's going to happen? I mean, just think about it, right? And then all these people could have been part of this economy, and they're being shortchanged by the whole thing. So I have to bring up this quote by Aldo Leopold. I say it everywhere, so I think people who have heard me will say, oh God, there she goes again. But this thing he said in 1949, but it is so true today also. He said that civilization so clutters this elemental man-earth relationship with gadgets and middlemen that awareness of it is growing dim. We imagine industry is what supports us, forgetting what supports industry. And that's exactly where we are now. Those middlemen who do not understand the land, who are not interested in true development. I mean, what is development? It should raise the quality of life for everybody and raise and keep it sustainable, right? That is true development. But so that's the middleman who usurps this notion for his own gain, and gadgets, which we assume technology will solve everything for us, but it's quite different from that. And so I really feel that connection is just at the center of both hope and of the despair that we feel today. That disconnection.
So, I'm obviously going to ask everyone who is listening to this to buy your book if they haven't already, and to just buy your book and read it. But I will also ask you to kind of, sum up or take me through some of the stories in your book, because they're incredibly powerful. And even for someone who may not buy the book immediately or who may buy the book because of these stories, I want you to kind of talk about, whether it's the Farraka Barrage or the de-desertification or the coastline of Kerala or whatever. In each of these cases, these stories are almost unbelievable, to see the level of hubris and folly by the state and just to see the extent of the damage and so on and so forth. So, take me, pick one which had the most impact on you, or talk about all of them if you want. We have time. And, take me through, which left the deepest impact on you, and kind of take me through that.
So all of them leave deep impacts, but I think the one which was most illustrative, which I will pick, is the Farraka Barrage, because I think it'll also be easy for people to wrap their heads around the story, even though, it's not in front of them. So in the late 19th century, so late 1800s, the port of Calcutta at that time was silting up. And it was an important port for the Britishers, and they needed that port to be silt-free because they wanted the ships to come all the way to Assam and up into, to Allahabad and so on for their trade as well as for movement of troops, various things. So they needed that port to be active and free of silt and so on. So they then came up with an idea. Some engineer, Arthur Cotton, he came up with the idea that that we should build a dam somewhere upstream. They're not said where, but somewhere upstream, and take the water that builds up through a canal and flush out the port downstream of the silt and keep it silt free, and do that periodically. And so the Britishers at that time could not decide upon where to build the dam. And so they shelved it. They didn't build it. And then we got independence. This was 1947, of course. And then by 1957, this topic came up again because Calcutta port continued to silt up. And so then India, along with some British engineers and stuff like that, they decided upon Farraka being the place where the dam was going to be built. And they built the Farraka Barrage, which is 2.6 kilometers long, and it's at a place called Farraka in northwest Bengal. This is just after the Ganga turns south from Bihar, enters West Bengal, and this is the head of the delta. And they built the dam there. And then they built the canal, which would flush the port of its silt. But none of these engineers thought of was the fact that the Calcutta sits in a tidal delta, and the tide brings back 160 times the volume of water than any of these canals could push out, which meant that the silt came right back in. Until today, the port still has a silting problem. So Farraka, the reason Farraka Barrage was built, was to not. Nothing happened. But what it did end up doing was something far more sinister. The Ganga is one of the siltiest rivers on earth, right? It's coming from a young mountain system, the Himalayas, and it's bringing all the silt, and then it comes and it builds these deltas, the delta of Bengal, undivided Bengal, all of Bengal, right? So if you put a dam across the Ganga in its lower plains, that is in its delta, and forget about it, what's going to happen? The silt is going to build up behind the barrage. And it did. And therefore, it rose, the whole riverbed rose. And as the riverbed rose, the river was trying to find ways to go here, there. The right bank has got rocks, the Raj Mahal Hills. So it's completely rocky, so there's no purchase there. And then it would just swing to the east. And there are all kinds of, mango orchards and paddy fields and villages and soft pliant earth. And so the river pushed back towards the east, and it just chunked up and just ate up all of that land, right? And so it's pushing, and ever since, so if you look at the maps, and the maps from 1971, which is when Farraka Barrage was built, till today, you'll find that this river is swinging wildly east. And it's finishing up all these villages. And what happens when a river swings east? You're basically having erosion, massive erosion, and the flooding. And there are people living. This is a very fertile delta, and people are, hundreds of thousands of people getting displaced every year till today. So it's been 52 years and counting, 53 years and counting, and it's still happening, this kind of erosion. Now, that's what's happening right in and around the Farraka Barrage itself. But what also happened is that it not only collects the silt behind it, and therefore the bed rises, it also deprives the delta of silt. The delta needs silt to shore up its defenses against the seas and against the storms and so on. Now, if you don't give that delta silt, that delta is going to eventually keep sinking, because there's going to be constant erosion, which happens anyway. And now with rising sea levels and increased storm surges and stuff like that, the delta is just completely laid bare with no defenses, with very little defenses. So that's number two, what it did. The third thing that it did was, you have the hilsa, which every Bengali loves, and it's an iconic fish, a cultural fish, and a very lucrative fish, and it goes upriver to spawn. It used to be found as far up as Buxar and Allahabad. Now, with the Farraka coming up, the river can't go upriver to spawn. The fish can't go upriver to spawn, and the whole fishery has collapsed. So all the fish upstream of the Farraka Barrage, which is what I was talking about, the fishermen earlier in Kahalgaon in Bihar, for example, eastern Bihar and all that, no fish in the river. none of these big fish, and they're forced to fish these really tiny fish, which they call trash fish, and the whole fisheries has collapsed. And this is a very lucrative fishery through the whole basin, which has collapsed. And so even just a single act, which was thought to solve one problem on paper, has ended up causing a whole host of ecological problems from Allahabad to the Bay of Bengal. So that's a total of 1,200 kilometers. And it's going on till today. So it's not something that happened once and is finished. It's continuing to happen. And this is just one story. And it's illustrative because it came from people not seeing the basin as a basin, of just seeing one problem isolated and doing something which they thought will solve the problem without really looking at the way things go, as the way the whole basin works. So that's one of the stories that is, and it's going to be expanded. Like I said, there's much more, because interestingly, what is added now in the paperback version of the book is what used to be Gaur Lakhnauti, which was the capital of Bengal then in the 1300s, a bustling city which fell because the river shifted, and that was because of probably an earthquake that the river shifted. But this river can make and break city fortunes. It's like this massive thing, right? It's a creature untamable, and here we are trying to tame it with the Farraka Barrage. Now it has swung so far east north of the barrage that it threatens to find that old route on the other side of Gaur and just bypass the Farraka Barrage and go off that way into Bangladesh. If that happens, it's going to be a lot of changes again, a lot of stuff. It could happen. It's not like it will happen, but it's just that it's threatening to. So if you look at the map right now, the Ganga north of the Farraka Barrage is way more east than, it's like a bulge, which is threatening to just push through because there was an old channel there. So, that's one story. But then several other such kind of willful ignoring of well-known scientific data. It's not opinion. It's not somebody saying something, saying, "Acha, no, I think of something." It's not ideology. It's just scientific data. And if you don't look at that data, and there are people who cried foul even when Farraka was being built, saying, "Don't do this, it's not good." They were labeled spies. They were labeled Pakistani spies because, of course, 1971, during all that time. And they were vilified, much like what's happening today. So, in fact, my book, therefore, it doesn't name a government. It's not against any government. It's just a mindset. The mindset of just trying to impose a certain way of thinking on the land, which is not working. It has not worked in all of this part of history. And it needs to change.
I think even outside of the question of all the data was there and all the arguments were there, even outside of that, I think in principle, if there is a complex ecosystem, the state should just not do anything. In principle, because you're always going to get it wrong. We always underestimate that. So this should just be the basic principle that unless there is something drastic and immediate and, on a very small scale, do not mess with a complex ecosystem. You don't know what's going to happen. And when I read about the Farraka Barrage in your book, and it's so beautifully described, and I read the Kindle version, so I'm presuming the paperback will have more, so I'll go out and buy that right away. But what struck me was that the scale of the story is enormous. I mean, this could be a 9-season web series, honestly, and you could, build human stories into it. Like, you pointed out, for example, that it's a recurring thing. Lakhs of people every year. It is not that something happened once. It is a recurring thing. It happens every year. But the government won't recognize it as a recurring disaster because it's erosion. And, that doesn't have that same sort of headline generating feel to it. Also, what you pointed out, and I found it very moving, was when you told the stories of families splitting up and kids going away to cities, and you said that this is not just erosion of land, it is erosion of families.
Yes.
So the impact of this just goes so deep. And
that was not, I must confess that was not those are not my words. Those are Tarikul's words, where he says that the Bhangan, which is erosion, does not stop at the doorstep. It comes right in.
Heartbreaking. But the biggest of all, and I think any self-respecting Bengali would agree with me, is the Ilish. The baki shop thak, amader Ilish's scarcity will be intolerable.
I mean, just imagine, right? And then your Ilish has gone from a good 2 kg lovely fish to about 800 grams. What is it now? Some ridiculous amount. Bangladesh, on the other hand, has imposed bans and things like that and has been able to keep its Ilish at a particular Podhanadir Ilish at some, sizable, respectable size, actually. But we have just allowed our fisheries to collapse.
I think, like Tobatek saying, like Palash Kachi, the Ilish is also a symbol of... I'm joking. But I'm joking, but I'm glad you agree.
No, but it is. Because, it's like the salmon in the US, right? Which were... there were so many rivers which were dammed and the salmons just disappeared from them. And the US is busy bringing down those dams. Elva was brought down. Klamath is being brought down because they want to let the salmon run again. And the whole ecosystem, it comes back. It regenerates. And they've seen that with Elva. It's been so good that they're doing it now with Klamath as well. I mean, there's research to show that these dams also are not what they're cut out to be. They're not. Anyway, yeah.
Right, so 3 final questions, but longish ones, so don't think you can just get up now. And it's not so easy. And if I think of more in between, I will ask. So my third last question, as it were, is... You've visited all these landscapes and come to know them intimately. I'm also curious about how the landscape of your own life has changed. Like in this process, you've not only had to look at the world in a new way, but I'm guessing just interacting with so many people who might begin as subjects but then end up as friends and people that you care about. And I'm sure you're in touch with many of them. And, they become part of the fabric of your life. The way you look at everything around you, I'm pretty sure has just been changed completely. So tell me a little bit about how this has changed you since you took that pause, in 2007 and made this journey. How have you changed?
I think one way in which I changed very, very fast was that I would go to these places, many of these places, with very stark devastation and, be hit with all kinds of stories, and then come back to a very comfortable lifestyle in Bangalore and, roof above my head, hot food waiting for me. But not just that. Sometimes I would land on a Saturday night or something and then there would be social engagements. And I would find the dancing, the drinking, the conversations, nothing wrong with it as it is. I mean, it's just that for me, the contrast was so stark that I would balk at it. I would be like, oh my God, what am I doing? And I just hours ago, I would have been in a place which was completely devastated. And so that made me acutely aware of my privilege, aware of the fact that I could get up and leave from these places that I'm telling stories about and that do move me, that have touched me. These people are people I know, but yet I can leave. And for nothing that I have done. I mean, this is just lottery of birth, where I was born. I could have been born in that village just north of Farraka, and I would have, been facing the same thing. This lottery of birth became very, very acute for me, that understanding. And with that came an intense... I don't want to make this sound very...
Don't overthink how you're sounding. Yeah, you've been doing this all.
No, sorry, I just don't want it to sound like, oh my God, like a saint or something.
Oh, come on.
I'm not a saint, but it did make me intensely humble, just really, really humble, and also that nothing I could do could really change anything. So kind of little wanting to change things, wanting to make people see how to see, wanting people to actually pay attention to the land, screaming, saying that, there are people who know what to do and you're not listening to them. It made me slightly angry, very angry. It made me irritated at the government. It made me very irritated at my friends who would talk about things that mattered to them which I would say, my God, in the big scheme of things, this is nothing. It's just, so it made me feel like almost made me feel like I didn't belong again, in that place. And so it changed me that way. It changed me a lot. And it's taken me a while to come to terms with that and even just be okay with that kind of company and the social life that I have. And that was one big way where my internal landscape changed. The second thing that was actually a little bit nicer was the fact that I loved the fact that what my dad said all along was bang on, spot on. I was like, dude, this guy got it right. Late 70s, early 80s, he's been saying this thing forever, and he was always the N of one, and so I was like, oh my God. So every time now I meet somebody, like when I was walking with Paul and we'd have these conversations, I'd be like, oh my God, Paul has heard of Wendell Berry. He's read Wendell Berry. I don't remember whether he's met him also, but whatever. He's read him. And then we would have these conversations where his ethics and my ethics and the land, and everything would match. And I'd be like, there are the people like this, There are people who get it, and I'm seeing that everywhere. Meeting so many people like Sunita Rao, who's the head of Vanastri, the seed bank, Malnad seed bank, people like that. And I'm so thrilled when I meet these kinds of people, because I know that Papa's, just his vision is kind of like vindicated. That's really the way it should be, and that would have saved. So that always makes me feel kind of like comfortable inside, that it's right, that we were always on the right side of these arguments, and it's being borne out now, and other people are also now joining the tribe, which is great. That's what you need, because you want that groundswell that I was mentioning earlier to kind of become louder and louder. So that's the second way in which so there's a very nice comfort in what I'm doing. There's like a chapa of, it's good. Let just keep doing what you're doing, kind of thing. So like a validation, not a validation, that's too stupid a word, but it's just like a confirmation, a reconfirmation of all these ideologies and these thoughts and all that they're the way forward. So that's the second way in which I've changed. And the third way is that what we were discussing earlier is that my ambition has fallen away. It's not that I have a goal in mind. Nothing. If nothing were to happen, and if I were to die tomorrow, I would be very, very happy. Because it's just that I'm spending my days or my time doing, or rather, just doing the right thing. But I don't want to say that.
You already said it. We'll capture the whisper. As Annie Dillard says, how we spend our days is how we spend our life.
Exactly. So that's what it is. And so now I'm feeling like it's just like it's great. And I think if there's any ambition left in me now, it's to go and spend some time observing a patch of land and just seeing various seasons, micro seasons, bigger seasons, years over that, in that patch of land, and see how things change. Observe the birds, the insects, the reptiles, everything that comes by uses it, the fungi, the mosses, how they change. So, just kind of spend my time with a patch of land, very close to a patch of land. So that's really, and it's not even an ambition. It's just that I just want my life to be that, and hoping that, once my Nat Geo grant gets done and so on, it's on the horizon.
Penultimate question, and one my writing students won't forgive me if I don't ask. Firstly, I must say I asked you about your photography earlier and spoke about it. I think your writing is just amazing, right? And there were various points where I was just saying that this is so good. Just one sentence to give you an example where you wrote, rivers play ping pong between banks, creating serpentine courses for themselves. And that whole thing of rivers play ping pong between, it's so visual. It just brings it alive. It brings rivers alive. It's not a static landscape anymore. It's so vivid and beautiful. And I want to ask about that process of writing because, as anyone who has ever been a writer knows, it's bloody hard. You have to spend a lot of time learning, doing your apprenticeship, figuring it out. And the hardest part often is that anxiety, not that anxiety of what other people will think, which of course we need to get past, but that anxiety of, can I capture what I see, right? And there is a danger there that sometimes you might try too hard, that you see something that has an amazing impact on you, but when you try to write it, if you try too hard, it just won't come, it'll fall completely flat. Tell me a little bit about how you taught yourself the craft of writing, how you learned it. Were there, guides along the way? Were there models that you could look at in terms of books and writers? Give me a sense of that journey.
So when I was young, Tagore's writing was very evocative for me. I felt like I was with him with his characters. Like, for example, I'll tell you one book which I've read many times, called The Wreck. It's about this mistaken identity and a boat capsizing in the Ganga, and everything about in that book was so visual, but so simply said. Nothing, not a single big word, right? Just very simply said, but so visual that, those kinds of things always grabbed me. I was just very taken up with the writing of Tagore and the visuals of Ray. So those two things have stayed with me throughout, and I must say the poetry of Gulzar. Those three things have stayed with me throughout. And it's always been, I always go back to some of those things. And even if it's just in my mind, I replay things in my mind just to feel that. But come 2012, I met Prem Panikar. That man, I don't know what he thought. He thought maybe that here's someone that needs to learn how to write. But he plied me with so many books, so many stories, links, and constantly taught me, corrected me, or, just very gently, in his very, very gentle way. But he would just kind of tweak things that I wrote. And I think it took me 10 years, so which is when I finally was writing the book or the more recent pieces, that I was able to maybe even begin to get the purport of what he was trying to do. But all those books that he suggested, every single one of them, every single link to a story from either Esquire or, different places that he would send me and tell me what to read and tell me how to read it, tell me what to look out for, what this person does well, what this person doesn't do well. That kind of stuff, I think, was my education in writing. I always thought I could write. Yeah, I could just string sentences together fairly okay. But I think my learning after meeting Prem has just shot up. And I'm still not there. I'm a very lazy writer. So I'll do the first draft because then everything will just tumble out of me. And then afterwards, trying to chisel it and put it into this, I hate it. I take long times to do that. So this is very bad. But I'm a lazy writer. But so I walk around the story a lot in my head. So before I put anything down on paper, and it's amazing how much patience a Prem has, because there'll be weeks will go by and he'll say, have you written? I'll be like, no, I'm still walking it around in my head. But then it helps because then when I sit down to write, it's just a few hours of writing and it'll all come out, the whole chapter will be out or whatever. So that helps. But I do walk things around in my head, and also just the fact that I also take photographs and I have short videos and things like that. It's a lot of memory aids as well. So I use all of that too. And if I'm smart, if I have been smart, I will have in the moment jotted down how something felt. Those are gold. My God, those are gold. So when I'm going through my notebook, I'm like, thank God I wrote this down, because those are just absolute gold. So some of those things are also helpful. Then people like Rachel Carson, her writing, Barry Lopez's writing has influenced me a lot. Also, Nan Shepherd, The Living Mountain, especially that book. Baker's Peregrine, big influences. Rob McFarlane. And who am I forgetting? Some of these are just beautiful. I read them over and over again, and it just kind of it makes me feel these places, and it's just lovely. And that's the kind of stuff I try when I just try to feel. So I try to go back to where I was and just try to feel what it was like, which helps. Photographs and all of that help. Sounds help. I often record sounds, just sounds, so then I can just hear the sounds again. So a lot of those things help. So I just try to go back to feel those places, and I try to put that down on paper. So it's not any very clever ways of doing it. I'm not somebody who obsesses over a sentence and tries to get it perfect. Very lazy writer. What comes out, comes out. That's it. So very bad. And I need to improve. And I've promised myself that I will improve on, just getting second drafts, third drafts out and so on. So that's good. But I think thanks to being a visual documenter also, I do observe keenly. So that helps. So the details come in right in the beginning.
Now that you've been identified as a fellow Bengali, the laziness is not surprising. Welcome to the club. And, and Prem's generosity as both a friend and an editor is, I think, legendary. And I have a t-shirt idea. We'll get a t-shirt made which says Prem ke Pujari. Are you with it?
Yeah. Yes, we love this so much.
Yeah, gentle listener, we just did a high five, so it will happen at some point. So my final question, though, I think you've answered some of it in the last answer.
Sorry, before you answer the final question, there's one person I forgot to mention, Paul Salopek. Amazing writer. His writing has taught me heaps. His conversations with him has taught me heaps. WhatsApp messages from him have taught me heaps.
Let's digress a bit and double click on that. Tell me about what you've learned from him in the process of walking, in the process of communicating.
So, first of all, humility. That man is amazing. Just, oof. I mean, what hasn't he achieved in his space? And what I've learned most and what I want to emulate is the fact that the man is 2 times Pulitzer Prize winner, National Geographic Fellow, all of that. And then he'll take on something like becoming a ranch hand in a Mexican ranch, or he'll go and become a commercial fisherman, very hard labor. That, I think it was that quality, not this particular thing, but that quality of walking through a landscape or something, which really caught my fancy all those years ago in the 1990s when the Mega Transect came out. Mike Fay's Mega Transect, he walked across the Congo. And that's what I wanted to do. I was like, nahi, mujhe ye karna hai. I really want to be able to tell landscape stories, but not from a car. Actually go through it, live through it, that kind of stuff. And so with Paul, it was almost like a fellow traveler, like very, very close buddy, even before I met him. And when we met, it was like just house on fire types. We laugh like mad. We have all kinds of conversations, and the philosophies are one-to-one corresponding. It's just like fabulous. But I think mostly how thoughtful he is. And even in his writing, and he's slow, and his dedication to writing. Oh my God, he writes in the craziest places. After walking 30 kilometers, he'll sit down and write. I mean, it's amazing dedication, which I haven't picked up. It inspires me, but I don't manage to emulate it at all. But when you read what he puts out, you're like, how can somebody describe something like this? It's just so beautifully done. And I know from credible sources, that is his editor, that he sends pristine copy in. The editor has to do nothing.
Wow.
So, aspirational goals, all those, that's not happening anytime soon. But yeah, so that man too. Yeah. So the 3, actually, Pradeep Krishan's observation, Prem Panikar's writing and dedication to writing and how he reads and writes, and Paul's overall humility and dedication and just beautiful way of expression. I think those 3 are
fantastic set of sort of mentors to have. The final question.
Yes.
For me and my listeners, give me recos of books, films, music, which you love so much you want to share with the world.
It's not anything new though.
It doesn't matter. It's just whatever gives you joy.
I think I mentioned a few of these.
You mentioned a few of the authors.
J.A. Baker's Peregrine. Fabulous. I mean, it's almost a masterclass in photography because of the way he sees, It's just beautiful. Really, really nice. Rachel Carson's books beyond Silent Spring, that is Edge of the Sea, all of her other books, which are again great in terms of nature writing. I know I'm going to forget. I wish I had come with a list.
We have time.
Okay, in terms of movies, Pather Panchali, I really love the way he does everything in that. Every scene, every frame. I don't know how many times I might have watched that. So visually beautiful. And then I have a sketchbook also. So I'm like fida on that totally. And how can I forget? Grapes of Wrath, Steinbeck. Big time learning for me. Big time learning. I mean, I just love that book, and I think
one exercise Prem gives to friends is to read Grapes of Wrath and simultaneously read a diary that Steinbeck wrote along with you.
He told me to do that too. Yeah, I did that, and oh my God, what a difference it makes. Because you're seeing it, you're seeing what was happening in his life at that time when he was writing this. Oh my goodness, it's fabulous. So that in tandem is just fabulous to do. Grapes of Wrath, yes. And then more recently, I have read this thing called Call Me American, which was also very interesting. It's about this guy who grows up in war-torn Mogadishu, which I found very, very, very gripping and interesting as well. I told you I like reading these refugee kind of stories of Hisham Matar's books. I liked them a lot. Kamila Shamsi's books, I liked hers a lot. So a lot of the diaspora kind of leaving, that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Artie, thank you so much. This has been such an enlightening conversation for me. I learned a lot from both the book and this conversation. So thanks for your time. This was great. And see, it wasn't so bad. It's 3.5 hours almost, I think.
You had said
okay,
8.
Right?
I was really scared about 8.
Anchoring effect. I got you to 3.5. No one has to do these things now that it's over, I can tell you. But we could have gone to 8, but you have to leave at 5:45. It's 5 o'clock now.
But thank you so much. I think this has been the first interview where I've spoken so much about so many things that I've never paid attention to before. I have not even thought through. I mean, childhood and all that, yeah, but who thinks about it in such detail? So thank you very much.
Thank you for your generosity.
I hope your friends your listeners will get through it.
Yeah, see, you made a Freudian slip there. It is not the case that all my listeners are my friends. I do have more listeners than that. It's not like your 10 readers, okay?
I know.
If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with anyone you think might be interested. Head on over to your nearest bookstore, online or offline, and pick up Margin Lands, Indian Landscapes on the Brink by Arati Kumar-Rao. You can follow Artie on Twitter at Arati Kumar-Rao, that's one word. You can follow me on Twitter at Amit Varma, AMITVARMA. You can browse past episodes of The Seen and the Unseen at seenunseen.in and every podcast app of your choice. Thank you for listening. Did you enjoy this episode of The Seen and the Unseen? If so, would you like to support the production of the show? You can go over to seenunseen.in/support and contribute any amount you like to keep this podcast alive and kicking. Thank you.